Hello everyone, I'm Mr. Night Story, and welcome to tonight's journey toward peaceful sleep. If you're enjoying this content, I would be so grateful if you could take a moment to like this video. I'd also love to hear from you. Please feel free to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your kind support truly helps me continue creating these relaxing experiences for you. Now, please make yourself comfortable as we gently begin tonight's journey to restful sleep. The last week of August, 2024, arrived with a bittersweet inevitability. In 7 days, I would be heading back to Westlake University for my junior year, leaving behind the comfortable monotony of my hometown and summer job. At 21, I was caught in that strange limbo between adolescence and adulthood, old enough to crave independence, but young enough to feel nostalgic about leaving home. "We need one more adventure before summer ends," Vanessa declared during our shift at the local coffee shop. Her dark hair was pulled into a messy bun, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted the determination in her eyes. "What did you have in mind?" I asked, wiping down the counter after the midday rush. "Camping," she replied without hesitation. "Nothing intense, just an overnight trip. Enough to say we did something besides working and binge-watching shows all summer." Daniela, who had been refilling the napkin dispensers, nodded enthusiastically. "I'm in. God knows I need to see something other than my bedroom ceiling in this cafe." The three of us had been friends since freshman year of high school. Vanessa was the planner, always organized, despite her carefree demeanor. Daniela was the adventurous one, first to try anything new. And me? I was the cautious one, the voice of reason that usually got overruled but came prepared with the first aid kit anyway. By the end of our shift, we had a plan. Vanessa's older brother had told her about a secluded hiking trail about an hour away. Beautiful, peaceful, and typically deserted on weekdays. We would leave early Thursday morning, hike in, camp overnight, and return Friday afternoon. "It'll be perfect," Vanessa assured us. "One last hurrah before we're buried in textbooks again." None of us could have imagined how that simple plan would spiral into the most terrifying experience of our lives. Thursday morning arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies with just enough clouds to keep the temperature comfortable. I woke early, double-checking my backpack, before Vanessa's car pulled into my driveway at 7 a.m. Daniela was already in the passenger seat, her blonde hair catching the morning light as she waved enthusiastically. "Ready for some nature therapy?" she called as I tossed my pack into the trunk. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, climbing into the back seat. "Did you guys remember bug spray? Last time we went hiking, I looked like I had chicken pox." Vanessa laughed, pulling away from the curb. "Got it. Plus sunscreen, extra batteries, and those little packets of tuna you like." The car radio blasted our favorite songs as we drove with the windows down, singing at the top of our lungs without a care for how we sounded. For that hour on the road, we were simply three friends enjoying the last fragments of summer freedom. No responsibilities, no deadlines, just the open road and the promise of adventure. Halfway to our destination, Daniela turned down the music. "We can't have a proper camping trip without beer," she announced. "We're not 21, I reminded her. "Speak for yourself," Vanessa said, pulling into a gas station. "I turned 21 last month, remember? But you don't drink," I pointed out. "Details," she said with a dismissive wave. "Besides, I'm not buying. Daniela's ID might work." While Vanessa pumped gas, Daniela strutted confidently into the store. I watched through the window as she approached the counter, flashing her most charming smile at the clerk. Minutes later, she returned empty-handed, her expression sour. "No luck?" I asked, unable to hide my amusement. "The guy wouldn't even look at the ID," she complained, sliding back into her seat. "Said he knew we were college students the minute we pulled up." As Vanessa finished with the pump, a truck pulled in beside us. The driver, a man in his late 20s or early 30s wearing a navy blue flannel shirt, stepped out and glanced our way. He was average height, with short brown hair, and the kind of stubble that suggested he hadn't shaved for a few days rather than cultivating a beard. At first glance, he seemed ordinary enough. "Car trouble?" he asked, his voice unexpectedly deep for his frame. "No, just getting gas," Vanessa replied politely but distantly. He nodded, then leaned against his truck. "Heading somewhere fun?" Something about his casual interest made my stomach tighten. His gaze moved between the three of us, lingering just long enough to make my skin crawl. "Just a day trip," Daniela answered vaguely, surprising me with her sudden caution. The man smiled, revealing perfectly straight teeth. "Camping, huh? I see the gear in your trunk." I hadn't noticed that the trunk was still partially open, exposing our backpacks and tent. "Need any help with that?" he continued, taking a step closer. "I know all the best spots around here." "We're good, thanks," Vanessa said firmly, closing the trunk with a definitive thud. "My brother already told us where to go." "Ah, well, have fun then," he replied, his smile never wavering. "Beautiful day for it." As we drove away, I glanced back to see him watching our car until we turned onto the main road. "That was weird," I muttered. Daniela shrugged. "Just being friendly, I guess." But something about the encounter lingered in my mind like a bad taste. I couldn't shake the feeling that his interest was more than casual politeness. The trailhead was exactly where Vanessa's brother had described. A small clearing with space for about 5 cars, marked by a weathered wooden sign. We were the only ones there, which simultaneously thrilled and unnerved me. Privacy was nice, but isolation came with its own concerns. "Wow, your brother wasn't kidding about having the place to ourselves," Daniela remarked, stretching after the drive. Vanessa checked her phone. No signal, exactly as advertised. "Great," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic despite the twinge of anxiety in my chest. "Just us in the great outdoors." We shouldered our packs and began the hike. The trail started easily enough, winding through sun-dappled woods with the occasional clearing offering views of distant hills. Birds called to each other overhead, and wildflowers dotted the path's edge. Under different circumstances, I would have found it peaceful. But as we hiked deeper into the forest, a peculiar sensation began to creep up my spine. Every so often I would turn around, certain I had heard something. Footsteps, perhaps, or the deliberate snap of a twig, only to see nothing but the empty trail behind us. "Did you hear that?" I asked after the 3rd or 4th time. "Hear what?" Vanessa was consulting her brother's hand-drawn map. "I don't know. Something moving," Daniela laughed. "It's the woods. Things move in the woods." "No, I mean, it sounds like—" I trailed off, unable to articulate what exactly was bothering me. Never mind. We continued hiking, the trail gradually becoming steeper and narrower. By midday, we stopped in a small clearing to eat lunch. The sunlight filtered through the canopy above, creating shifting patterns on the forest floor. It should have been beautiful, but I couldn't relax. My eyes kept darting to the tree line, expecting to see— what? I didn't know. "You're jumpy today," Daniela observed, passing me a granola bar. "Just tired, I guess," I lied. "Didn't sleep well last night." After lunch, we pressed on. The trail became more challenging, with fallen trees to climb over, and steep inclines that left us breathless. Despite the physical exertion, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. Several times I thought I glimpsed movement among the trees, a shadow moving independently of the swaying branches, a flash of blue that could have been a shirt. But each time I looked more carefully, there was nothing. By late afternoon, we reached our destination, a small plateau overlooking a valley, with a stream gurgling nearby. It was picturesque, exactly the sort of place that would appear on a postcard advertising the serenity of nature. "This is perfect," Vanessa declared, dropping her pack with a relieved sigh. I forced a smile. "Yeah, perfect." As we set up camp, I positioned myself to keep the trail in view, just in case. Setting up camp provided a welcome distraction from my growing unease. The physical tasks of pitching the tent, gathering firewood, and filtering water from the stream required enough concentration to momentarily quiet the nagging voice in my head that kept whispering warnings. "Have you ever seen stars like this?" Daniela asked as the sun began to set, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. I had to admit, the view was spectacular. As darkness fell, the stars emerged one by one until the sky was ablaze with them, far more numerous and brilliant than what we could see from our light-polluted hometown. Vanessa got a fire going, a small, contained blaze that cast a circle of warmth and light around our campsite. We roasted hot dogs on sticks and made s'mores, the familiar activities almost making me forget my earlier anxiety. Almost. As night fully descended, the forest around us transformed. The cheerful daylight sounds, birdsong, rustling leaves, the gentle babble of the stream gave way to more ominous noises. Hoots, screeches, and distant howls punctuated the darkness. Though I knew they were just ordinary nocturnal creatures, each sound made my muscles tense. "Let's tell ghost stories," Daniela suggested, her face eerily illuminated by the flickering firelight. "How about no?" I countered, adding another log to the fire. Vanessa chuckled. "What's wrong? Scared of the dark?" "Yes," I wanted to say. "I'm terrified right now and I don't know why." Instead, I forced a laugh. "I just don't want to give myself nightmares. These woods are creepy enough." "They're just trees," Daniela said with a shrug. "Nothing here that can hurt us." I wasn't so sure. The darkness beyond our firelight seemed impenetrable, a solid wall of black that could hide anything or anyone. Again, I found myself straining to identify sounds in the distance, to separate normal forest noises from something else. "Did you see something?" Vanessa asked, noticing my frequent glances into the darkness. "No," I lied, "just making sure the fire doesn't spread." We stayed up late, talking and laughing as we often did during our weekend sleepovers. The familiarity of our conversation provided some comfort, but I couldn't fully relax. Every time the fire crackled or a twig snapped in the distance, I flinched. Eventually, exhaustion won out over alertness. We doused the fire until only glowing embers remained and retreated to our tent. Inside the thin nylon walls, I positioned myself near the zippered entrance, my back to my friends, facing the way we had come. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by sounds both real and imagined. Each time I drifted off, the same unsettling dream jolted me awake. A figure standing motionless at the edge of our campsite, watching, waiting. Every time I woke, I had to remind myself it was just a dream, just my mind processing the day's anxieties. Until it wasn't. I jerked awake sometime in the deepest part of the night, my heart hammering against my ribs. The inside of the tent was pitch black, and for a moment, I couldn't remember where I was or what had woken me. Then I heard it again, a distinct crunching sound, like someone deliberately stepping on fallen leaves. Not an animal, a person. I held my breath, straining to listen through the thin fabric of the tent. Beside me, Vanessa and Daniela slept soundly, their breathing deep and regular. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by what could only be described as a slow exhalation. My entire body tensed. Someone was outside our tent, moving slowly around the perimeter. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, a deer perhaps, or even a bear. But animals don't move with such deliberate stealth. I wanted to wake my friends, but fear paralyzed me. What if I was wrong? What if it was nothing? Would they ever let me live it down? The footsteps circled the tent once, twice, then stopped directly outside the entrance. I could see the faint outline of a shadow against the fabric, a human silhouette, standing perfectly still. For several excruciating minutes, nothing happened. The figure didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there as if waiting. My lungs burned from holding my breath, and my fingers curled around the edge of my sleeping bag so tightly they went numb. Then, slowly, the zipper of our tent began to move. Up, inch by inch, the sound deafening in the silence of the night. My mind raced through 1,000 terrifying possibilities: a deranged hunter, an escaped convict, the man from the gas station who had somehow followed us. I couldn't wait any longer. I lurched forward, grabbing the zipper from inside and yanking it back down. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice shrill with fear. The shadow disappeared instantly. There was a flurry of movement outside, rapid footsteps retreating into the woods, and then silence. "What the hell?" Daniela mumbled, sitting up groggily. "What's going on?" "Someone was outside," I whispered, trembling so violently I could barely form the words. "Someone tried to open our tent." Vanessa fumbled for her headlamp, switching it on. The sudden glare made me wince. What, are you sure? Positive. I saw their shadow. They were right here. Daniela crawled to the entrance, cautiously unzipping it just enough to peer outside. There's nothing there now. They ran when I called out, I insisted. Vanessa looked skeptical. Maybe it was an animal? Animals don't unzip tents, I snapped. We sat in tense silence, listening to the night sounds. Nothing seemed amiss now. Just the normal chorus of insects and the occasional distant call of an owl. After 15 minutes of vigilant listening, Daniela sighed. It was probably just the wind moving the zipper, she suggested. Or maybe you were dreaming. I wasn't dreaming, I said firmly. Someone was out there. Despite my certainty, I couldn't prove it. There were no footprints visible in the beam of Vanessa's headlamp, no evidence of an intruder. Eventually, my friends drifted back to sleep, convinced I had experienced a particularly vivid nightmare. But I stayed awake, sitting upright in my sleeping bag, staring at the zipped entrance of the tent. I knew what I had seen. Someone had found us in these remote woods, someone who had stood watching us sleep, someone who had tried to get inside our tent, and I was terrified they would return. The night stretched endlessly, each minute crawling by as I maintained my vigilant watch. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the hooting of an owl, the soft breathing of my sleeping friends, seemed magnified in the darkness. I didn't dare close my eyes, convinced that the moment I succumbed to sleep, the mysterious visitor would return. When the first weak light of dawn finally began to filter through the tent walls, I nearly wept with relief. Exhaustion weighed on me like a physical burden, but fear had kept me rigidly awake. You look terrible, Daniela observed when she woke, stretching in her sleeping bag. Did you sleep at all? No, I admitted, my voice hoarse. I kept watch. Vanessa sat up, rubbing her eyes. You really think someone was out there? I know someone was out there, I insisted. We emerged from the tent cautiously, surveying our campsite in the pale morning light. Nothing seemed disturbed. Our backpacks remained where we had left them. The cooler was undisturbed. The embers of our fire had completely died out. See? Daniela gestured around. Nothing happened. I was about to concede the point when something caught my eye. A flash of color at the edge of the clearing, partially hidden behind a tree. I approached slowly, my heart accelerating with each step. There, hanging on a low branch, was a navy blue flannel shirt. The same shirt the man at the gas station had been wearing. Guys, I called, my voice barely above a whisper. Look at this. Vanessa and Daniela joined me, staring at the shirt. Someone left their shirt, Daniela suggested, reaching for it. Don't touch it, I hissed, grabbing her wrist. It's his, the man from the gas station. He followed us here. Vanessa's face paled. That's impossible. How would he know where we were going? We didn't even tell him. I don't know, I admitted. But this is his shirt. I'm sure of it. We stood there, staring at the garment as if it might suddenly animate and attack us. The implications were terrifying. Not only had someone been watching us, but they had deliberately left evidence of their presence, a message that we were not alone. We need to leave, I said, now. For once, neither of my friends argued. We packed up our camp in record time, stuffing equipment haphazardly into our backpacks, not bothering with the careful organization we had used the day before. None of us suggested breakfast. Our appetites had vanished. As we were about to depart, I paused, looking back at the shirt still hanging on the branch. Should we take it? Daniela asked, following my gaze. As evidence. I shuddered at the thought of touching it. No, let's just go. We set off down the trail at a pace just short of running. Our earlier enjoyment of the forest completely evaporated. Every shadow, every movement in the periphery of my vision sent a fresh surge of adrenaline through my system. We had hiked for perhaps 20 minutes when a sound stopped us in our tracks, a clear, deliberate cracking of branches ahead. Someone was on the trail in front of us. This way, Vanessa whispered, pointing to a narrow deer path that branched off from the main trail. We can circle around. We veered off the established path, pushing through underbrush and scrambling over fallen logs. The forest seemed to close in around us, branches clawing at our clothes, roots threatening to trip us. I lost all sense of direction, trusting Vanessa's innate navigational skills to guide us back to the main trail eventually. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, we paused to catch our breath in a small clearing. Daniela pulled out her water bottle with shaking hands. "Do you think we lost him?" she asked. I was about to respond when I saw it. A flash of movement between the trees ahead of us. A figure, partially obscured by foliage, stood watching us. Though the distance made details difficult to discern, I could make out the outline of a man approximately 30 yards away. "There," I breathed, pointing. "Don't move." The figure remained motionless for several seconds, then raised a hand in what could have been a wave or a mocking salute. "Hey!" Vanessa shouted, her voice echoing through the trees. "What do you want?" The figure turned and disappeared into the dense underbrush. "Let's go," I urged, pulling my friends in the opposite direction. "We need to get back to the car." We abandoned any attempt at stealth, crashing through the forest like startled deer. Our only goal was distance, to put as much space as possible between ourselves and our stalker. I had no idea if we were heading in the right direction, but staying still wasn't an option. "Wait!" Vanessa gasped after we had been running for several minutes. She pulled out her phone, swiping to access the compass app. "We're going southeast. The car is northwest." We changed direction, moving more deliberately now, trying to balance speed with awareness of our surroundings. Every few minutes we would stop to listen, but the forest had gone unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, just the sound of our own labored breathing. "Do you think he's still following us?" Daniela whispered, as we paused near a fallen tree. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm not taking any chances." We continued our trek, the terrain becoming increasingly unfamiliar. None of the landmarks matched what we had seen on our hike in. The realization dawned on me slowly, then with horrifying clarity. We were lost. "Vanessa?" I asked, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "Do you know where we are?" She studied her phone's compass with growing frustration. "We should have hit the main trail by now." Daniela climbed onto a large rock, scanning the surrounding forest. "I don't see anything that looks familiar." The sun was climbing higher in the sky, its heat intensifying. Our water supplies were dwindling, and the physical and emotional strain of the morning was taking its toll. I felt lightheaded from lack of sleep and food, my limbs heavy with exhaustion. "Let's try to get to higher ground," Vanessa suggested. "Maybe we can see the parking area from there." We began ascending a steep incline, using tree roots and rocks as handholds. The exertion was grueling, but fear provided an inexhaustible source of energy. About halfway up, I glanced back down the slope and froze. There, at the bottom of the hill, stood a man. Even from this distance, I recognized his build and stance. He was looking directly at us, making no attempt to hide. "Go," I whispered urgently, pushing Daniela ahead of me. "He's there. He's watching us." We scrambled up the remainder of the hill, not daring to look back again. At the top was a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the surrounding area. In the distance, perhaps a mile away, I could see what might be the parking area where we had left our car. "There," I pointed. "I think that's it." Vanessa oriented herself with the compass. "It's that way," she said, pointing to a path that would take us down the other side of the hill. "If we keep going straight, we should hit the main trail eventually." As we started our descent, a shout echoed from behind us. "I just want to talk." The voice was unmistakably male, carrying clearly through the trees. "Why are you running?" We exchanged horrified glances and increased our pace, half running, half sliding down the steep hillside. Branches whipped at our faces, rocks dislodged beneath our feet, but we didn't slow down. "Help me!" Daniela gasped suddenly, stumbling to a halt. A branch had caught her backpack strap, yanking her backward. I turned to help her, but the sound of footsteps on the hill above us spurred me to desperate action. I pulled out my pocket knife and sliced through the strap, freeing her but leaving her pack behind. "Leave it," I ordered when she hesitated. "We can't stop." We continued our frantic descent, eventually reaching level ground and what appeared to be a game trail. Without discussion, we followed it, hoping it would lead us back to civilization. The trail widened gradually, showing signs of human use. Boot prints in the mud, a discarded energy bar wrapper. Hope surged through me. We were getting closer to safety. Then, without warning, we emerged onto the main trail. The sight of the clearly marked path nearly brought me to tears of relief. We weren't lost after all. "Which way?" Daniela asked breathlessly. Vanessa pointed to the right. "That way. I recognized that fallen tree from yesterday." The drive home was silent, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The experience had transformed what should have been a pleasant memory into a trauma that would haunt us for years to come. That night, despite being safely home in my own bed, I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me jerk awake, convinced that someone was outside my window, watching, waiting. I kept seeing the man's face, his unsettling smile, the cold calculation in his eyes. In the days that followed, we learned the police had found no sign of the man at the trailhead. The shirt we had described was gone, as if it had never been there. Without evidence, the case was essentially closed before it began. We returned to college the following week, but the experience changed us. Vanessa became hypervigilant, jumping at unexpected sounds. Daniela refused to go anywhere alone, and I developed an insomnia that medication could barely touch. Years have passed since that camping trip, but I still avoid hiking trails and forests. I still check my locks multiple times before bed, and I still scan every gas station, every parking lot, every crowd for a face I hope never to see again. Because the most terrifying realization wasn't that we were followed or watched or stalked. It was that our pursuer walked away unpunished, free to find other victims, other women to terrorize. And somewhere out there, perhaps at this very moment, he's watching someone else, calculating, planning, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The woods keep his secrets well, too well. I've always been enthralled with the macabre. The darker, the better, at least as far as entertainment choices are concerned. Horror films, true crime documentaries, supernatural podcasts, I consume them all with voracious curiosity. That being said, I had never witnessed or been part of any genuine paranormal encounter. My fascination remained safely academic, confined to the pages of books and pixels on screens. That would change dramatically in October 2023, the year I turned 27. The mountains of northern Arizona offered a welcome respite from Phoenix's lingering summer heat. My younger brother Ryan was attending a college football training camp there, and several of us had decided to make a small vacation of it. We rented a cabin in the dense pine forest just 20 minutes from the training facilities, a perfect base camp for Ryan and an ideal getaway for the rest of us. Our small group consisted of myself, Ryan, my older brother William, my boyfriend Jason, and Jason's childhood friend Vincent. The cabin itself was nothing remarkable, a 2-bedroom structure with a loft, rustic kitchen, and a living area centered around a stone fireplace. What made it special was its isolation. The nearest neighbor was at least half a mile away, and the forest pressed close on all sides, transforming the windows into dark mirrors after sunset. Ryan had always been the rational one in our family, level-headed, logical, rarely given to flights of fancy. Which is why his stories about experiences with a Ouija board during his freshman year had surprised me so much. He recounted them without embellishment or dramatic flair, which made them all the more unsettling. "I'm telling you," he explained one evening as we sat around the fireplace, "there were 5 of us in the dorm lounge, and that pointer moved on its own. We all swore we weren't pushing it." "But you guys were probably doing that ideomotor thing," Vincent argued, gesturing with his beer bottle. "Unconscious movements. Your brain makes your muscles do things you're not aware of." Ryan shrugged. "Maybe, but it spelled out the name of our resident assistant's deceased grandmother. None of us knew that name." "Coincidence?" Vincent insisted. "All I know," Ryan continued, his voice dropping slightly, is that weird things happened in our dorm for weeks afterward. Doors opening and closing, items disappearing and reappearing in strange places. One guy even transferred to another building. The wind outside picked up, sending a hollow moan through the chimney. The sound perfectly punctuated Ryan's story, and a moment of silence fell over our group. "We should try it," I suggested suddenly. William raised an eyebrow. "Try what? A Ouija board?" "Why not?" I sat forward, genuinely excited. "We could make one. It doesn't have to be fancy." Ryan shook his head immediately. "Count me out. I've done it once, and that was enough." "Oh, come on," Jason said, nudging Ryan's shoulder. "Don't tell me you actually believe in that stuff." "I believe that there are things we don't understand," Ryan replied carefully. "And I believe in not messing with them." "I'm with Ryan on this one," William added. "Those things always gave me the creeps." But my curiosity had already taken hold. The prospect of experiencing something genuinely unexplainable thrilled me. I'd spent years immersed in horror stories. What if this was my chance to step into one? "I'm doing it," I announced. "Even if I have to do it alone." I would soon regret those words more than I could possibly imagine. "You're not going to do it alone," Jason sighed, standing up from the couch. "I'll join you." Vincent, never one to miss out on anything, quickly added, "Me too. I want to prove to everyone this is nonsense." William reluctantly agreed to participate as well, though he kept glancing at Ryan, whose expression had grown increasingly concerned. "You'll need to set some rules," Ryan advised, his voice tense. "Never ask when you're going to die. Never ask about God. Never use it alone. And most importantly, you need to say goodbye properly." "What happens if we don't?" I asked, my interest piqued. Ryan's expression darkened. "You leave a door open, and things can come through." The rational part of my brain dismissed his warning as superstition, but something in his tone gave me pause. Still, my determination outweighed my caution. I began searching the cabin for materials. In the kitchen pantry, I found a large piece of cardboard, the back of a cereal variety pack. It wasn't ideal, but it would serve my purpose. I spread it out on the dining table and used a Sharpie to create a makeshift Ouija board. I drew the alphabet in a semicircle, added numbers 0 through 9 below, and wrote yes and no in the upper corners. At the bottom, I added the word goodbye. For the planchette, the pointer that supposedly moves across the board, I cut a smaller piece of cardboard into a rough heart shape. I considered how to make it slide more smoothly and ended up wrapping it in aluminum foil from the kitchen. "This is ridiculous," Vincent scoffed, watching me work. "You really think some ghosts are going to use your arts and crafts project to communicate with us?" "It's not about the materials," Ryan interjected from his position on the couch, where he was determinedly not participating. "It's about intention. The board is just a tool." I completed my creation as darkness fell outside. Rain had begun to spatter against the windows, and occasional thunder rumbled in the distance. The sudden autumn storm created the perfect atmosphere for what we were about to attempt. We gathered around the dining table, positioning the homemade board in the center. William dimmed the lights, leaving only the soft glow from the kitchen to illuminate our faces. I placed 2 candles on either side of the board and lit them, more for ambiance than necessity. "This is how it works," I explained, positioning the makeshift planchette in the center of the board. "We each put one finger lightly on the pointer, just the tip of your index finger. Don't press down, just touch it." "And then what?" Vincent asked, still looking skeptical. "We ask questions, and if there's a spirit present, it will move the pointer to answer us." "And if the pointer doesn't move?" William asked. I shrugged. "Then Vincent gets to say, 'I told you so,' and we watch a horror movie instead." Jason smiled nervously. "Let's get this over with." The 4 of us took our places around the table. Ryan remained on the couch, watching us with unconcealed apprehension. Outside, the storm intensified, rain now drumming steadily against the roof. We each placed a fingertip on the foil-covered planchette. The moment we made contact, a particularly loud crack of thunder shook the cabin, causing all of us to jump slightly. "Perfect timing," Vincent muttered. I took a deep breath. "Is anyone there?" I asked, my voice steady despite the flutter of anticipation in my chest. "Is there a spirit who wishes to communicate with us?" For several long moments, nothing happened. The planchette remained motionless under our fingers. Vincent shot me a knowing look, his skepticism evident, but then, almost imperceptibly at first, the planchette began to move. The movement was so subtle that I initially thought I had imagined it, a slight tremor beneath my fingertip, but then it became more pronounced, a definite sliding sensation across the cardboard. "Who's doing that?" Vincent demanded, his voice tight. "Not me," William whispered. "I'm barely touching it," Jason added. The planchette continued to move, slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. It drifted toward the upper corner of the board and settled firmly on yes. A collective intake of breath circled the table. Even Vincent appeared startled. "Is anyone there?" I repeated, my heart now pounding against my ribs. Again the planchette moved to yes. "Who are you?" I asked. The planchette began to move more deliberately now, hovering over letters in sequence, spelling out visitor. "Visitor?" William echoed. "Visitor from where?" The planchette circled the board once before spelling out far. "That's conveniently vague," Vincent muttered, though his earlier smugness had faded considerably. "Are you a good spirit?" Jason asked. The planchette remained motionless for what felt like an uncomfortably long time. Then, slowly, it moved to yes. "They all say that," Ryan called from the couch. His voice startled me. I'd almost forgotten he was there. "Do you have a message for any of us?" I asked, ignoring my brother's comment. The planchette spelled watch. "Watch what?" William asked, tension evident in his voice. "Darkness," came the reply. As if responding to these words, the lights in the cabin flickered briefly. The storm outside had intensified, wind now howling around the eaves. "I don't like this," William said quietly. "It's just the storm affecting the power," I reassured him, though I felt a distinct uneasiness spreading through my body. "Let's ask something specific, something that would prove this is real." Vincent, still the most skeptical despite his obvious discomfort, nodded. "Good idea. Let me ask something only I would know." He cleared his throat. "What was the name of my childhood dog when I was 5 years old?" The planchette began to move immediately, with purpose and precision, spelling Scout. Vincent's face drained of color. "How did—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "That's correct. I've never mentioned Scout to any of you." "Lucky guess," William suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. The heavy feeling in the room intensified. The candle flame suddenly bent sideways, though there was no draft I could detect. "Ask something else," I urged, a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through me. "What's our brother's name, the one who isn't here?" I asked, testing the entity. "William," the planchette spelled. "No, William is here," I corrected. "Our other brother." "Ryan," it responded. I glanced at Ryan, who was now standing behind the couch, watching us intently. "That was an easy one," I acknowledged. "What's the name of William's fiancée?" The planchette hesitated, then began to move, spelling Rebecca. "Close," William said, his voice strained. "It's Rebecca, with 2 C's." As if hearing the correction, the planchette moved to no and then spelled Rebecca. A chill crept across my skin. The precision was unsettling. "I want to stop," William suddenly announced, but he didn't remove his finger from the planchette. "Just a few more questions," I pleaded, completely captivated by what was happening. The planchette suddenly jerked violently, nearly jumping off the board entirely. When it settled, it began to move again, faster than before, spelling danger. "What danger?" Jason asked, his voice barely audible. "Opening," came the reply. "What's opening?" I demanded. "Door," was the simple answer. At that precise moment, a tremendous gust of wind hit the cabin, and the front door flew open, slamming against the wall with a crash that made all of us jump. Cold air and rain swept into the room, extinguishing both candles simultaneously. Vincent jerked his hand away from the planchette. "That's it. I'm done." In the confusion that followed, William rushing to close the door, Jason fumbling for the light switch, I lost track of the planchette. When the lights came back on, I noticed with alarm that it was still moving across the board, despite no one touching it. It came to rest on a single word: no. "Nobody move," Ryan said, suddenly beside the table. His face was ashen. "You need to finish this properly." "What's happening?" William demanded, water dripping from his hair where the rain had caught him. "You've made contact with something," Ryan explained, his voice tight with tension, "and it doesn't want you to end the session." Vincent gave a nervous laugh. "This is ridiculous." The wind blew the door open. The pointer moved because the table got bumped. "Then why is it still moving?" I whispered. All eyes turned to the planchette, which was indeed sliding in small circular movements across the center of the board, without any human contact. "Everyone sit back down," Ryan instructed. "All four of you need to put your fingers back on the planchette and properly close the session." "I'm not touching that thing again," Vincent protested. "You have to," Ryan insisted. "You helped open this door. You need to help close it." Outside, the storm had reached a fevered pitch. Rain lashed against the windows like gravel, and the wind moaned through the trees with an almost human quality. The electric lights flickered again, longer this time, threatening to plunge us into darkness. Reluctantly, we resumed our positions around the table. I could feel the tension radiating from each person as we placed our fingertips back on the planchette. The moment we made contact, it began to move with purpose, spelling, "not alone." "What does that mean?" Jason whispered. "Brought others," the planchette continued. A distinct thud came from upstairs, something heavy falling. William jerked his head toward the sound. "There's nobody up there," he said. "Ask who these others are," Ryan urged from behind me. "Who came with you?" I asked, my mouth dry with fear. "Hungry ones," the planchette spelled. The temperature in the room seemed to drop precipitously. My breath fogged in front of my face. "I think we should say goodbye now," William suggested, his voice shaking slightly. Before anyone could respond, the planchette shot across the board to spell "never leave." "We need to end this," Ryan insisted. "All of you, move the pointer to goodbye and say it out loud together." We attempted to guide the planchette toward the word at the bottom of the board, but it resisted, as if being pulled in the opposite direction. The sensation was undeniable. Something was fighting against our collective effort. "Push harder," Ryan commanded. With considerable effort, we managed to drag the planchette to goodbye. "Now say it," Ryan instructed, all together. "Goodbye," we chorused, our voices uneven. Nothing happened for a moment. The planchette remained motionless under our fingers. Then, without warning, it flew off the board entirely, skittering across the table and onto the floor. The candles, which William had relit, extinguished themselves simultaneously. For several seconds, no one moved or spoke. The only sound was the storm outside and our rapid breathing. "Is it over?" Jason finally asked. "I don't know," Ryan admitted. "I've never seen it respond like that." Vincent stood abruptly. "This whole thing is nonsense. You all convinced yourselves something supernatural was happening, but it was just the power of suggestion and a convenient storm." "Then how do you explain it knowing about Scout?" William challenged. "One of you must have heard me mention him before, or maybe it was just coincidence," Vincent replied, but his confident tone had a forced quality to it. I remained seated, staring at the makeshift board. Something felt unfinished, incomplete, as if a conversation had been interrupted rather than concluded. "We should burn the board," Ryan suggested, "just to be safe." "Now you're being ridiculous," Vincent scoffed. "It's a piece of cardboard with marker on it." "I don't care," Ryan insisted. "I've seen what happens when these things aren't handled properly." In the end, we compromised. I folded the board and the planchette and sealed them in a plastic bag, which Ryan then stored in the trunk of his car. The physical objects were removed from the cabin, but as I would soon discover, whatever we had contacted wasn't so easily dismissed. Sleep eluded me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the planchette moving across my homemade board, spelling out warnings. The storm eventually passed, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. The silence seemed almost worse than the howling wind, expectant, as if the forest were holding its breath, waiting. I shared a room with Jason while William and Vincent took the second bedroom, and Ryan claimed the loft. Around 2 a.m., I finally drifted into a restless sleep, only to be jarred awake by a sound I couldn't immediately identify. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes flew open, staring into darkness. Beside me, Jason slept soundly, his breathing deep and regular. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. A precise, deliberate rhythm. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, pause. I told myself it was just a branch, though I couldn't recall any trees growing close enough to touch the cabin. Pulling the blanket tighter around my shoulders, I tried to ignore it. Tap, tap, tap. The sound continued, growing slightly louder. With each sequence, my anxiety increased. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, I slipped out of bed and approached the window. The curtains were drawn, and I hesitated before reaching out to pull them aside. The tapping stopped the moment my fingers touched the fabric, as if whatever was causing it knew I was there. I yanked the curtains open, half expecting to see a face pressed against the glass. Instead, I was met with the empty darkness of the forest. No branches, no birds, nothing that could have caused the sound. As I stared into the night, my eyes adjusted to reveal the moonlit outlines of trees, and between them, a movement, something shifting in the shadows, just at the edge of perception. Not animal, not human, but something deliberately concealing itself. I let the curtain fall back into place and retreated to the bed, my heart hammering. For the remainder of the night, I lay awake, listening. The tapping didn't resume, but something worse took its place, the distinct sensation of being watched. Morning came with a welcome brightness that seemed to banish the night's anxieties. Over breakfast, I mentioned the tapping, but no one else had heard anything unusual. Probably just the house settling after the storm, William suggested, pouring himself coffee. Or pine cones hitting the roof, Jason offered. They fall all the time up here. Only Ryan looked concerned. Did anything else happen? He asked quietly while the others were distracted. I thought I saw something moving in the trees, I admitted, but it was dark, and my imagination was probably running wild. Ryan nodded slowly. Keep an eye out, and maybe we should all stay together today. The day passed uneventfully. Ryan had football training, and the rest of us hiked a nearby trail, enjoying the crisp autumn air and the spectacular fall colors. The forest seemed completely benign in daylight, a stark contrast to the menacing presence I had sensed the previous night. By evening, even I had nearly convinced myself that my experience had been nothing more than nerves and an overactive imagination influenced by our Ouija session. We returned to the cabin for dinner, and as darkness fell, Vincent suggested we watch a horror movie, an ironic choice that nonetheless helped lighten the mood. By midnight, we were all ready for bed, the previous night's uneasiness seemingly forgotten. I fell asleep quickly this time, exhausted from the hike and the previous night's insomnia, but my rest was short-lived. I jolted awake, disoriented. The room was pitch black, and for a moment I couldn't remember where I was. Then the details rushed back, the cabin, the Ouija board, the tapping at the window. What had awakened me? I strained my ears, listening. The cabin was silent except for Jason's breathing beside me. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood. It seemed to be coming from the ceiling. I lay frozen, tracking the sound as it moved directly overhead, then across the ceiling to the far wall, down the wall, and finally to the bedroom door. The doorknob began to turn, slowly, deliberately. I tried to call out to Jason, but my voice lodged in my throat. The door began to open, a sliver of deeper darkness appearing in the gap. With tremendous effort, I managed to reach out and shake Jason awake. "Someone's in the house," I whispered urgently. Jason sat up immediately, instantly alert. "What? Where?" The door stopped moving. "The door, it was opening by itself," I said, my voice trembling. Jason reached for his phone, activating the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the door, which was firmly closed. "Are you sure?" he asked, scanning the room. "It looks closed to me." "I swear it was opening. And there was a scratching sound on the ceiling," I insisted. Jason got out of bed and checked the door, then the closet, then under the bed. "There's no one here," he assured me. "You were probably dreaming." But I knew I hadn't been dreaming. The scratching had been too distinct, the movement of the doorknob too real. "I'm going to check the rest of the cabin," Jason said, pulling on a t-shirt. I followed him, unwilling to be left alone. We checked every room, finding William and Vincent sound asleep in their room and Ryan dozing in the loft. Everything seemed normal. "See? Everyone's asleep. There's no one here but us," Jason said gently. We returned to our room, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As Jason drifted back to sleep, I remained awake, watching the door. Just as dawn began to lighten the sky, I heard it again, the faint scratching sound, this time from inside the closet. Before I could react, the closet door swung open a few inches, though there was no draft to explain the movement. I closed my eyes tightly, telling myself it wasn't real. When I opened them again, the door was closed, but the scratching continued. The next morning, tension hung in the cabin like a fog. No one seemed well rested. Vincent appeared particularly haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. "Bad night?" I asked him as he fumbled with the coffee maker. He glanced at me, then quickly away. "Just couldn't sleep. Kept hearing weird noises." My stomach tightened. "What kind of noises?" Vincent hesitated. "Like whispering, right outside the bedroom door. I thought it was one of you guys at first, but when I checked, there was no one there." William, emerging from the bathroom, overheard our conversation. "You heard it too? I thought I was losing my mind." "What did you hear?" I asked, my uneasiness growing. "Same thing, whispering, and footsteps in the hall. But every time I looked, there was nothing." Jason joined us, looking perplexed. "So everyone had a bad night? I thought it was just you," he said, nodding to me. Ryan was the last to come downstairs, his expression grim. "We need to talk about what's happening," he announced without preamble. "Nothing's happening," Vincent insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "Old cabins make noises. We're all just on edge because of that stupid board game." "It wasn't a game," Ryan said quietly, "and you know it." The five of us gathered around the dining table, the same table where we'd used the Ouija board. In daylight, with cups of coffee and the smell of toast in the air, it seemed absurd to be discussing supernatural phenomena. And yet, the shared experiences of the night were difficult to dismiss. "Here's what I think," Ryan began. "When we used the board, we made contact with something that probably shouldn't have been contacted. And because we didn't end the session properly, it's still here." "That's ridiculous," Vincent interjected, but with less certainty than before. "Is it?" Ryan challenged. "You all heard things last night, things that can't be easily explained." "So what do we do?" William asked. "Exorcism? Sage burning? Call a priest?" Ryan shook his head. "I'm not sure. In my experience, these things usually fade over time if you don't engage with them. But this feels different, more intentional." "We could try using the board again," I suggested. "Properly say goodbye this time." "Absolutely not," Ryan said firmly. "That would only make things worse. Give it more of a connection to us." "Then we leave," Vincent decided. "Pack up and get out today." No one argued with this suggestion. Within an hour, we were gathering our belongings, eager to cut our stay short by 2 days. As I was packing my suitcase, I noticed something strange, a small symbol drawn in what looked like ash on the inside of the closet door. It resembled an eye within a triangle. I hadn't seen it before, and I was certain it hadn't been there the previous day. I called Ryan to my room and showed him the marking. "Did you do this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ryan shook his head slowly, his expression darkening. "We need to leave, now." We hastened our packing, an unspoken urgency driving us. But as we were loading the cars, a peculiar lethargy began to settle over me. My limbs felt heavy, my thoughts foggy. Looking at the others, I could see they were experiencing similar effects. Movements becoming sluggish, eyes struggling to stay focused. "Does anyone else feel strange?" William asked, leaning against his car. Everyone nodded, too drained to speak. "It doesn't want us to leave," Ryan said, his voice tight with effort. "We need to fight this." With tremendous concentration, we managed to finish loading the vehicles. I climbed into Jason's car while Vincent and William took William's car. Ryan had his own. As Jason turned the key in the ignition, nothing happened. The engine didn't even attempt to turn over. "Battery's dead," he announced, trying again. In the car next to us, William was having the same issue. Only Ryan's car started successfully. "This can't be a coincidence," I said, fear clutching at my chest. Ryan approached our car. "Both batteries dead at the same time? No way." "We'll jump them," Vincent suggested. But even with jumper cables connected to Ryan's running car, neither vehicle would start. "This is impossible," Jason muttered, checking under the hood for any obvious problems. "We'll have to call for help," William decided, pulling out his phone. His expression immediately fell. No signal. We all checked our phones. Not one had service, despite having had perfect reception the previous days. "We'll take my car," Ryan offered. "We can all squeeze in. Leave the luggage." We abandoned the dead vehicles and piled into Ryan's small sedan. As he put it in reverse, the engine suddenly died. "No," Ryan whispered, trying the ignition again. The car remained silent. We were stranded. By mid-afternoon, we had exhausted all practical options. A hike to the nearest town would take at least 4 hours, and with darkness approaching and no guarantee of finding help, it seemed more prudent to remain at the cabin for one more night. "We'll try again in the morning," William reasoned. "Maybe whatever electrical issue affected the cars will resolve itself." No one mentioned the impossibility of 3 separate vehicles experiencing simultaneous electrical failures, or the coincidence of all our phones losing service at once. The unspoken understanding was that something beyond our control, something potentially malevolent, had trapped us here. We unloaded the essential items from the cars and returned to the cabin. The atmosphere inside had changed noticeably. The air felt heavier, the shadows deeper. Even with all the lights on, the rooms seemed dimmer than before. "We should stay together tonight," Ryan suggested as evening approached. All of us in the living room. No one objected. The thought of separating, of facing the night alone in our respective rooms, was unbearable. We arranged the couch cushions and spare blankets on the living room floor, creating a makeshift communal sleeping area. The television provided background noise, a cooking show that none of us actually watched, but which filled the silence with comforting, ordinary sounds. As night fell, our conversation grew increasingly strained. We avoided discussing the strange occurrences directly, instead making forced small talk about work, sports, future plans, anything to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Around 10 p.m., the lights flickered, then went out completely. The television died mid-sentence, plunging us into darkness and silence. "Power outage," Jason said quickly, his voice unnaturally loud in the sudden quiet. Vincent used his phone's flashlight to locate candles in the kitchen. Soon the living room was illuminated by a half-dozen small flames, casting elongated shadows across the walls. "Everyone try to get some sleep," William suggested. "Tomorrow we'll hike out at first light." We settled into our makeshift beds, but sleep was the furthest thing from my mind. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind outside, sent waves of anxiety through me. The first incident occurred around midnight. A series of loud knocks, 3 in succession, thundered through the cabin. They didn't come from the doors or windows, but seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, as if something massive were trying to enter. We all sat upright, exchanging alarmed glances. "What was that?" Vincent whispered. Before anyone could respond, the knocking repeated, 3 heavy thuds that vibrated through the floor. "It's just the structure settling," Jason attempted, but his voice trembled. The knocking continued, moving around the cabin in a circular pattern. 3 knocks on the east wall, 3 on the north, 3 on the west, 3 on the south. A complete circuit. Then silence fell again, more oppressive than before. "I'm going to check outside," William announced, reaching for his phone. "Don't," Ryan warned. "That's what it wants, to separate us." "There's nothing out there," Vincent insisted, though he made no move to verify his claim. The second incident happened about an hour later. The temperature in the cabin plummeted suddenly, our breath forming visible clouds in the candlelight. The cold was unnatural, bone-deep and penetrating, impossible for an autumn night. "Something's here," Ryan whispered, his eyes scanning the shadows beyond our candlelit circle. A sound began to emerge from the darkness, a low, rhythmic scraping like nails dragging across wood. It started faint but grew steadily louder, circling our position just as the knocking had done. In the flickering light, I noticed something on the wall, a dark stain spreading slowly across the wooden paneling. As I watched in horror, it formed into a crude symbol, the same eye within a triangle I had found in the closet. "Look," I gasped, pointing. All eyes turned to the wall. As we watched, more symbols began to appear, forming a circle around the room, just above eye level. "What are they?" Jason asked, his voice barely audible. "Nothing good," Ryan responded grimly. The scraping sound intensified, now accompanied by a low, atonal humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The candle flames bent sideways, all pointing toward the center of our circle, defying the laws of physics. Vincent suddenly clutched at his chest, his eyes wide with panic. "I can't breathe," he gasped, struggling for air. William moved to help him, but froze halfway. "Something's touching me," he choked out, visibly trembling. The humming grew louder, resolving into something that almost resembled words, indecipherable but clearly intentional communication. "Don't listen to it," Ryan commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "Cover your ears and close your eyes. All of you." We obeyed, huddling closer together. Through my closed eyelids, I could sense the candles growing brighter, their light intensifying to an impossible degree. The air pressurized, as if we were deep underwater or at high altitude. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The pressure released, the temperature normalized, and the humming ceased. I cautiously opened my eyes. The candles burned normally again, and the shadows had retreated to their corners. The symbols on the wall had vanished, leaving no trace. "Is it over?" Jason whispered. Ryan shook his head slowly. "No, it's just beginning." The remainder of the night passed in tense vigilance. None of us slept. By dawn, we were exhausted, strung out, and desperate to escape. The morning light revealed something none of us had expected. All 3 cars were now parked differently than we had left them, arranged in a perfect triangle around the cabin. We didn't discuss the repositioned vehicles. Some things are too inexplicable, too terrifying to acknowledge directly. Instead, we focused on what seemed manageable, checking if any of the cars would start. Miraculously, all 3 roared to life without issue. "Let's go, now," Vincent urged, already throwing his belongings into William's car. No one argued. Within 15 minutes, we had packed and were ready to depart. As I performed a final sweep of the bedroom to ensure I hadn't forgotten anything, I noticed something on the mirror, condensation forming letters before my eyes, always watching. I backed out of the room without a word and hurried to the car. The drive down the mountain was tense but uneventful. Cell service returned about 20 minutes into our journey, and the feeling of oppression that had hung over us began to lift slightly. "Did that really happen?" Jason asked as we neared the interstate. "All of it?" "I don't know what it was," I replied honestly, "but something happened." We parted ways at a gas station near Flagstaff, Ryan heading back to his training camp, William and Vincent returning to their shared apartment, Jason and I to our place in Phoenix. The normalcy of the gas station, people fueling cars, buying snacks, going about their ordinary lives, seemed surreal after what we had experienced. I hugged Ryan goodbye, holding on perhaps longer than necessary. "Be careful," he warned quietly. "These things don't always end when you leave the place." His words sent a chill through me, but I nodded and forced a smile. "I will." The drive home to Phoenix was silent, both Jason and I lost in our own thoughts. The familiar desert landscape was a welcome change from the dense, secretive forest, and by the time we reached our apartment, I had almost convinced myself that we could put the experience behind us. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in days, exhaustion finally overcoming anxiety. But my relief was short-lived. I began to notice small discrepancies in our apartment. Objects moved from where I'd left them, Doors I was certain I'd closed standing open, electronics turning on by themselves. Jason experienced similar phenomena, but attributed them to forgetfulness or mechanical glitches. A week after our return, I received a frantic call from William. "It followed us," he said without preamble. "Vincent and I, we're seeing things, hearing things. It's here." "What kind of things?" I asked, though I already knew. "Shadows moving when nothing's there, whispering at night, and the symbols, they're appearing on our walls." My stomach dropped. "Have you told Ryan?" "He's not answering his phone. His roommate says he hasn't shown up for practice in 3 days. The implications of this hit me with physical force. We need to find him." Within hours, Jason and I were back on the road to Flagstaff. When we reached Ryan's dormitory, his roommate confirmed our fears. No one had seen Ryan since his return from the cabin. "He was acting weird," the roommate told us. "Jumpy, kept saying something was watching him." We filed a missing persons report with campus security and the local police, but I knew in my heart that conventional methods wouldn't help. Whatever had happened to Ryan was beyond ordinary explanation. That evening, gathered in a hotel room with William and Vincent, I finally voiced what we had all been avoiding. We opened something with that board, something that attached itself to us, and now we need to figure out how to close it. "If Ryan couldn't figure it out, what chance do we have?" Vincent asked, his former skepticism entirely gone. "We have to try," I insisted, "for Ryan's sake and for our own." Over the following days, we researched obsessively, consulting books on the paranormal, speaking with self-proclaimed experts, even visiting a local church to speak with a priest. The consistent advice was troubling. We needed to confront whatever entity we had contacted and formally break its connection to us. "You mean use the board again?" William realized, horror evident in his voice. "It's the only way," I confirmed. We opened a door. Now we have to close it properly. None of us wanted to return to the cabin, so we decided to conduct the ritual in William and Vincent's apartment. I recreated the Ouija board, more carefully this time, with research into the proper symbols and configurations. We gathered the necessary protective elements suggested by our sources: salt, blessed candles, religious symbols. On the night of the full moon, exactly 2 weeks after our initial contact, we sat around the board. The atmosphere was solemn, purposeful, no longer a game or an experiment, but a desperate attempt to undo what we had done. "Remember," I instructed, "no matter what happens, we must end by moving to goodbye and breaking contact, all of us together." We placed our fingers on the planchette. The candles flickered simultaneously, though there was no draft. "We wish to speak with the entity we contacted at the cabin," I stated firmly. The planchette remained still for several long moments. Then, slowly, it began to move, spelling "here." "We want to formally close our connection with you," William said, his voice steady despite his obvious fear. The planchette circled the board twice before spelling "not done." "What do you want from us?" Vincent asked. "One of you," came the reply. A chill pervaded the room. The implication was clear. "Where is our brother Ryan?" I demanded. "Mine now," the planchette spelled. Jason gripped my hand tightly with his free one. "We need to end this." "Not without knowing what happened to Ryan," I insisted. The planchette moved again. "Trade." "Trade what?" William asked. "1 for 1, was the answer. Understanding dawned with horrifying clarity. It wanted one of us in exchange for Ryan. "No deals," I stated firmly. "We're closing this connection now. You have no power here." The planchette jerked violently, nearly pulling out of our grasp, spelling "always power." The lights in the apartment flickered, then went out. In the sudden darkness, illuminated only by our candles, the planchette continued to move, spelling out the same phrase repeatedly. "Always watching." "Now," I commanded, "to goodbye. Push it there together." With collective effort, we forced the planchette to the word at the bottom of the board. "Goodbye," we shouted in unison. The candles extinguished simultaneously. For a moment, absolute darkness enveloped us. Then, a single blinding flash of light illuminated the room, and in that instant, I saw a figure standing in the corner. Not Ryan, not anyone I recognized, but something wearing the approximation of a human form. its features obscured by shadow despite the intense light. When the lights came back on moments later, we were alone in the apartment. The Ouija board was completely blank, all my careful lettering and symbols erased as if they had never existed. We never found Ryan. The official investigation concluded that he had left campus voluntarily, possibly experiencing a mental health crisis. His car was discovered abandoned at a hiking trailhead 50 miles from the cabin, with no sign of foul play. But we knew the truth, or at least part of it. Something had taken him, something we had inadvertently invited into our lives through a simple act of curiosity. In the months that followed, the strange occurrences gradually subsided. The moving objects, the unexplained sounds, the feeling of being watched, all slowly faded, but they never disappeared completely. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake to the sound of 3 deliberate knocks, or catch glimpses of symbols forming momentarily on my bathroom mirror after a shower. And occasionally, when I'm alone at night, I hear whispering, too faint to understand, but persistent, waiting, watching. I've learned to live with it, this persistent echo of our mistake. But I've never used a Ouija board again, nor will I ever. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed, and some prices are too high for mere curiosity. The first rule of backcountry hiking is to tell someone where you're going. I broke that rule on September 12, 2023, when I decided on impulse to take the unmarked trail at Granite Ridge. The Forest Service had closed it temporarily due to environmental concerns, but locals at the diner mentioned it led to breathtaking views most tourists never saw. After 3 days of following designated paths with their neat signs and frequent hikers, I craved something authentic, untouched. My backpack held the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, water purifier, 3 days of food, first aid kit, GPS device, and my father's hunting knife, a gift he'd pressed into my palm before I left for college. "The wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes," he'd said. I should have remembered those words. The trail began innocuously enough. Pine needles cushioned my steps, and late summer sunlight filtered through the canopy. 2 hours in, the path narrowed, becoming fainter where fewer feet had tread. I checked my GPS, still on track according to the rough map I'd downloaded. By late afternoon, I reached a rocky outcropping offering views of endless forest stretching to distant mountains. Perfect for camping. I set up my tent near the edge, where I could watch the sunset while eating my dehydrated pasta. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. I built a small fire, watching sparks rise into the starry sky. That's when I first felt something wrong. A stillness had descended, different from normal forest quiet. The insects stopped chirping all at once. No rustling in the underbrush, no distant owl calls, just complete silence pressing in from every direction. I scanned the tree line with my flashlight. Nothing. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Wildlife, I reasoned. Bears, coyotes, maybe a mountain lion. I stoked the fire higher and moved my knife closer. Sleep came fitfully. Every crack of a branch jolted me awake. Around 2 a.m. I heard what sounded like footsteps circling my camp, too rhythmic for an animal, too careful for a hiker. I called out, "Hello, someone there?" My voice sounded thin against the vastness. No response, just more footsteps, followed by an odd scratching against a nearby tree trunk. I unzipped the tent, just enough to peer out. My fire had died to embers, casting weak red light that barely reached the nearest trees. The scratching continued, louder now. I aimed my flashlight toward the sound. In the cone of light, I saw fresh marks gouged into bark, still oozing sap. They weren't random, 3 vertical lines crossed by 1 horizontal, too deliberate for animal claws, too recent to ignore. I retreated into my tent, knife clutched in sweating hands, listening to the forest breathe around me until dawn finally broke. Morning brought rational thought again. I photographed the tree markings, trying to convince myself they were old blazes left by loggers or previous hikers. The symbols didn't match any trail markings I recognized, but their methodical arrangement suggested human origin. I decided to continue deeper. Turning back meant a full day's hike, and I'd barely begun exploring. The trail grew steeper as it wound through increasingly dense forest. Old-growth trees towered overhead, their massive trunks covered in moss. The forest floor was a tangle of ferns and fungi. Beautiful, but disorienting. Landmarks began to look identical. By midday, I consulted my GPS more frequently. The signal weakened beneath the thick canopy, but still showed my position. I was approximately 8 miles from my entry point, with another 2 miles to a small alpine lake marked on my map, my intended destination. Around 2 p.m., I stopped at a small clearing to rest and eat. As I unpacked my lunch, something caught my eye. A crude structure of branches leaning against a fallen log. Too intentional to be natural, it resembled a primitive shelter. Inside, I found what appeared to be a bed of pine boughs, long since dried out. Someone had camped here, possibly weeks ago. What troubled me was the collection of small bones arranged in a circle nearby. Rabbit, squirrel, maybe fox, picked clean and bleached by sun. Hunters or trappers weren't unusual in these woods, but the careful arrangement seemed ritualistic. I took several photos, then continued hiking, eager to reach the lake before nightfall. The path grew fainter, requiring careful attention to follow. Twice I lost it completely, backtracking until I found markers, broken branches and disturbed earth that indicated previous passage. At 4:30 p.m., I heard water. Quickening my pace, I emerged from dense trees onto the shore of a small lake nestled in a natural bowl of surrounding hills. Its surface reflected the sky perfectly, an inverse world beneath. Beautiful, but utterly silent. No birds, no insects. Nothing disturbed the water's surface. I selected a campsite on higher ground with good visibility, mindful of last night's unease. While gathering firewood, I discovered more symbols carved into trees, variations of what I'd seen before, some fresh, others weathered by seasons. They formed a rough perimeter around the lake. Setting up camp, I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Several times I spun around, expecting to catch movement, but saw nothing. The forest seemed to hold its breath. As sunset painted the lake blood red, I noticed something disturbing: footprints along the muddy shore. Not animal tracks, not mine. Human prints, but oddly shaped, as if the person walked with an unusual gait. They emerged from the water and disappeared into the trees directly across from my camp. I photographed them, using my boot for scale. They were roughly my size but splayed wider, with deeper impressions at the toes, as if someone walked leaning forward. Most troubling, they appeared fresh, made since I'd arrived. That night, I didn't build a fire. Something warned me against announcing my position. I retreated to my tent early, keeping my knife, GPS, and flashlight within reach. Sleep seemed impossible. At 11:27 p.m., I woke to the sound of water splashing. Through my tent's mesh window, moonlight illuminated the lake's surface, rippling from disturbance. Something had entered or exited the water. I lay motionless, controlling my breathing, straining to hear over my thundering heartbeat. Wet footsteps approached from the shore, slow, deliberate steps with an uneven cadence. They circled my tent once, pausing at the entrance. I clutched my knife, fighting the urge to call out. The footsteps retreated after what felt like hours, but was likely minutes. When I finally gathered courage to unzip the tent, dawn was breaking. Outside, I found wet footprints, the same unusual pattern I'd photographed yesterday, circling my tent before heading back toward the lake. More disturbing were items arranged at my tent entrance. My backpack, which I'd left inside the tent, now sat outside, contents neatly removed and organized. Nothing was missing, just methodically examined. Beside them lay a freshly killed rabbit, neck broken, untouched otherwise. This wasn't wildlife, this wasn't coincidence. Someone was stalking me. I packed hastily, abandoning all pretense of continuing my trip. The GPS showed the shortest route back to the trailhead, different from my approach path, but potentially saving hours. I headed out at first light, walking briskly, constantly scanning my surroundings. An hour into my retreat, I found more tree markings, fresh ones that hadn't been there yesterday, pointing toward the path I was taking. My stalker knew where I was going. The realization sent adrenaline flooding through my system. By midday, nothing had appeared on the trail, but evidence of being followed accumulated. Broken branches that weren't my doing. More symbols carved freshly into trees. Once I found my own boot print overlaid with another, the strange, splayed foot, pressed directly into my track. I abandoned the trail, cutting cross-country along a ridge, hoping to throw off pursuit. The terrain became challenging, loose shale, dense underbrush, fallen trees creating obstacles. I pushed through, ignoring scratches from branches and the burning in my legs. By late afternoon, I realized my mistake. In departing from the trail, I'd lost clear landmarks. The GPS signal weakened in the steep terrain. The device showed me 6 miles from the trailhead, but the path ahead looked impassable, a sheer rock face dropping to a ravine below. I would need to backtrack or find another route around. Either way, another night in the wilderness was unavoidable. With the sun sinking, I found a defensible position. A small clearing backed against a cliff face, reducing directions of approach. I worked quickly, gathering firewood, setting up my tent, creating small noise traps with piles of dry leaves and twigs at likely approach paths. As darkness fell, I built a fire but kept it small, more for protection than warmth. I arranged my equipment for quick packing and kept my knife unsheathed beside me. Sleep would be dangerous, but total exhaustion equally so. I planned to alternate between light dozing and alert watching throughout the night. The first few hours passed uneventfully. Stars emerged in stunning clarity. I checked my phone, no signal as expected. I recorded voice notes documenting everything, preserving evidence should anything happen to me. At midnight, my traps triggered, dry leaves crunching approximately 50 yards east of my position. I extinguished my fire immediately, moving behind the natural stone barrier I'd selected earlier. In the darkness, something approached with that now familiar uneven gait. It stopped just beyond where my fire had been, remaining in shadow. I heard breathing, ragged, animalistic, yet controlled. Then a sound I'll never forget. A voice that wasn't quite human attempting to mimic words. "Coming home soon?" it rasped, in what sounded like an imperfect imitation of my own voice from the recordings I'd been making. My blood crystallized in my veins. Whatever watched me from the darkness had been close enough to hear my private documentation, close enough all along to study me. The voice came again, closer this time. "Help me, please help." Different now. A woman's voice pleading, then another. "Anybody out there?" A man's voice calling as if searching for someone. I remained frozen, recognizing the strategy, predators mimicking prey. I'd read about this, folkloric accounts of creatures that lured victims by imitating distress calls. Scientifically impossible, I'd always thought. Now I wasn't certain. What was certain? Someone dangerous was hunting me, using psychological tactics to provoke response. The rational explanation was a disturbed individual living in these remote woods, perhaps for years, developing unusual skills and behaviors. A feral human was terrifying enough. The figure moved closer, still obscured by darkness. Moonlight caught something reflective, eyes perhaps at the wrong height for a person standing upright. I glimpsed a silhouette, hunched and misshapen. "I see you," came another mimicked phrase. This time my father's voice from an old voicemail I'd played earlier during the hike when feeling nostalgic. I abandoned stealth and flicked on my flashlight, aiming directly at the voice. What I illuminated defies easy description. A human figure, male, based on build, crouched on all fours, naked except for what appeared to be animal hides draped across shoulders and waist. The skin visible was deeply weathered, covered in mud and what looked like self-made tattoos or scarification. The head swiveled toward my light with unnatural quickness, eyes reflecting yellow-green like an animal's. Most disturbing was the face, gaunt, with matted beard reaching chest level, but contorted in an expression that seemed to be attempting a smile with muscles long unused to the movement. Around the neck hung a crude necklace of small bones and teeth. We locked eyes for perhaps 3 seconds before it moved, not retreating as expected, but charging with explosive speed directly toward me. I scrambled backward, dropping my flashlight, fumbling for my knife. The figure closed distance with impossible quickness. The smell hit me first. Unwashed human, animal musk, and something chemical I couldn't identify. In desperation, I grabbed a burning branch from my fire's remains and thrust it forward. The figure recoiled from the flame with a hiss that sounded more animal than human. It circled, looking for another approach angle. I kept the burning wood between us, backing toward my tent and equipment. "Stay back," I shouted, voice breaking. "I'm armed. People know where I am." The figure paused, head tilting as if processing my words. Then it spoke again, not mimicry this time, but a rough, disused voice. "No one knows. Checked your car. No note. No plan." The words came haltingly, as if speech was difficult. Terror froze me. It had been to my car, perhaps followed me from the very beginning. More immediately concerning, it was right. In my spontaneous decision to take this unmarked trail, I'd told no one my whereabouts. The standoff continued for agonizing minutes. I kept the flame forward, though it was burning dangerously close to my hand. The figure maintained distance but didn't retreat, watching with unblinking intensity. "What do you want?" I finally managed. Another head tilt. "Company," came the eventual reply. "Stay," a pause, "or hunt." The implication was unmistakable. I could either willingly remain or a chase would ensue. Neither option promised survival. Abruptly, it retreated several steps, still facing me. "Choose," it said, then turned and melted into darkness with silent efficiency. I stood trembling, the burning branch finally singeing my fingers. After dropping it, I quickly packed essential gear: water, GPS, knife, jacket, abandoning the tent and non-critical items. If I was being hunted, speed mattered more than comfort. The GPS showed a route to the nearest marked trail, approximately 4 miles southeast. From there, another 5 miles to a ranger station marked on my map. 9 miles through nighttime wilderness with a pursuer who clearly knew the terrain better than I did. I had no choice but to try. Moving through unfamiliar forest at night defies every safety protocol for wilderness travel. Each step risked ankle-breaking falls, disorientation, or worse. But remaining meant certain confrontation with something far more dangerous than darkness. I navigated by GPS and moonlight, maintaining a northeast bearing that should intersect the main trail. Every sound, branches creaking, nocturnal animals moving, sent pulses of adrenaline through my system. I kept imagining that hunched figure moving silently parallel to my course, watching, waiting. An hour into my flight, I heard it. That distinctive uneven footfall, sometimes bipedal, sometimes on all fours, moving through undergrowth perhaps 200 yards behind. It made no attempt to hide its pursuit now. I abandoned all pretense of stealth and ran, knowing the risk of injury increased exponentially. Branches whipped my face. Twice I fell, once gashing my arm on sharp rock. The second fall dislodged my GPS, sending it tumbling into darkness. No time to search. I oriented myself by the North Star and continued northeast. The sounds of pursuit grew closer despite my desperate pace. Whatever followed, moved through this terrain with practiced efficiency, while I stumbled and crashed forward like wounded prey. At a small stream crossing, I employed a desperate tactic, wading upstream for 50 yards before exiting on the opposite bank and doubling back in a parallel course. Basic evasion technique from wilderness survival training. For 15 blessed minutes, the sounds of pursuit faded. False security. As I paused to catch breath and check bearings, a guttural sound came from directly ahead. My hunter had anticipated the maneuver, cutting across to intercept rather than following directly. I changed direction immediately, heading due east toward steeper terrain. The waxing moon provided just enough light to avoid major obstacles, but my pace slowed dangerously on the incline. Near dawn, I reached a ridgeline overlooking a valley. In the gray pre-morning light, I could make out a dirt road cutting through forest perhaps 2 miles distant, not on my original map, but potentially leading to civilization. Hope surged momentarily. That's when I heard it again. That terrible mimicry, now using my own panicked breathing pattern from minutes earlier. It came from just below the ridgeline I stood upon. My pursuer had circled ahead again. I reversed course, sliding down scree slopes, using falling stones as distraction. Twice I glimpsed movement, that hunched figure scrambling across rock faces with impossible agility, always maneuvering to cut off my most likely escape routes. This wasn't random pursuit. This was calculated herding, driving me toward some predetermined location. I was being played with, tested, assessed. Exhaustion began to take serious toll. Without water since midnight, muscles cramping, cuts stinging with sweat, my reaction slowed. Twice I nearly walked directly into ambush positions, only noticing the waiting figure at last moment. By mid-morning I recognized the terrible pattern. Each escape attempt led me circuitously back toward the lake where I'd first found footprints. My hunter knew these woods intimately, using terrain features I couldn't recognize to channel my desperate flight. During one frantic scramble up a dry creek bed, my foot dislodged something partially buried, a backpack, weathered by exposure but clearly modern. Digging quickly, I found camping equipment, a camera with ruined memory card, and a wallet containing identification for a hiker reported missing 18 months earlier, according to the search party notice also inside. I wasn't the first to be hunted here. The realization lent desperate energy to my increasingly hopeless situation. As the sun reached zenith, I found myself on familiar ground, the approach to the lake from a different angle than my original path. My circular flight had accomplished nothing except depleting my strength. Worse, I now understood the strategy. I was being exhausted, disoriented, and driven into terrain of my pursuer's choosing. At the lake's edge, I collapsed, legs no longer responding to commands. The water looked inviting. I could attempt swimming across rather than circling around. But something in my instincts screamed warning. The lake had significance beyond natural feature. My hunter had emerged from it, returned to it. Something about the water itself felt wrong. As I weighed diminishing options, movement caught my eye across the mirrored surface. The figure stood openly now on the opposite shore, watching, waiting for my next move, testing whether I understood the game. I had one resource remaining, my father's hunting knife. One final decision to make. The clearing sky brought afternoon heat that rippled the lake's surface. Across the water, the figure remained motionless, observing. I needed to break this deadly pattern. I assessed my situation clinically, as shock began replacing terror. No GPS, no phone signal, minimal water, unknown distance from help. A pursuer with intimate knowledge of the terrain who clearly viewed me as either prey or potential company in whatever disturbed existence they led here. The lake offered my clearest tactical advantage. Open ground with visibility in all directions. No ambush potential. Here at least I could see my hunter approaching. I moved to the shore's edge and made obvious preparations for camp, gathering stones for a fire ring, clearing a sleeping area, all while keeping the figure in peripheral vision. It watched intently, but made no move to approach while daylight remained. As shadows lengthened, I built a large fire, feeding it until flames reached shoulder height. Then I began methodically sharpening my knife on lakeside stones. The metallic scraping carried across water, an unmistakable sound of preparation. The psychology of predator-prey relationships hinges on assessment of threat versus reward. I needed to significantly raise the potential cost of attacking me. If this was indeed a feral human and not some impossible creature from folklore, it would understand self-preservation calculations. Darkness fell fully. My fire illuminated perhaps 30 feet in all directions, a visible barrier between myself and the encroaching night. Across the lake I could no longer see my watcher, but felt their presence intensifying. Near midnight, movement finally came, not from across the lake, but from behind me. The figure had circled around during darkness. It approached my fire's perimeter, remaining just beyond clear visibility, a shadow moving among shadows. "I know you're there," I called, my voice steadier than expected. "I understand what you want." The figure stopped. A long silence followed before that halting voice replied, "What do I want?" "Territory," I answered. "Privacy. No interference. You've been alone out here for years. You'll do anything to keep it that way." Another long silence. Then, smart prey. I'm not prey, I responded firmly. I'm leaving these woods. I have no interest in your territory. There's no reason for either of us to get hurt. A sound emerged that took moments to identify. Laughter, albeit distorted by disuse. I'll say that. I'll try leaving. The figure moved closer, entering the outermost ring of firelight. I could now see details I'd missed in our previous encounter. Old scars covering exposed skin, what appeared to be self-extracted teeth woven into the matted beard, fingers unnaturally elongated from years of quadrupedal movement. How many? I asked quietly. 7 successful hunts, came the reply with disturbing pride. 3 escaped, a head tilt. You are strong, good stamina, intelligent, good addition. Addition to what? Family. The word chilled me more than anything previous. I recalled the multiple footprints at the lake, different sizes, different patterns. The various voices mimicked that didn't match this individual. There are more of you, I stated, rather than asked. The figure made that terrible approximation of a smile again. Soon more, growing, learning. Whatever existed in these woods, whether a cult, a community of feral humans, or something science couldn't yet explain, had been capturing hikers and transforming them into something no longer fully human. The successful hunts likely referred to those who had been converted. The escaped were those who had somehow made it out. I needed to be the 4th escapee. I stood slowly, knife visible in my hand. I'm leaving now. I'm walking straight north until I hit the highway. I have people expecting me tomorrow who will send search parties if I don't appear. This last part was a lie. No one expected me for 3 more days, but delivered with conviction. The figure studied me, head cocked. Others tried fighting. I'm not fighting, I replied calmly. I'm simply leaving. Fighting would cost you, maybe cost me. Unnecessary. A long, calculating silence followed as we assessed each other across the firelight barrier. I maintained eye contact despite every instinct screaming to look away from that inhuman gaze. Finally, it spoke again. Head east, not north, 2 miles to road. Then south, 3 miles to ranger station. A pause. Tell no one what you saw. We find those who tell. The directions matched what I'd glimpsed on maps. This creature was offering genuine escape information. But conditional escape. Why let me go? I asked. That terrible smile again. You'll return. Curious, wanting answers, they always return. Without waiting for a response, the figure melted back into darkness. I maintained position for another hour, feeding the fire, watching for movement. Nothing approached. Finally, I gathered my remaining supplies and headed east as directed, knife ready, senses hyper-alert. The journey proved exactly as described. 2 miles brought me to a fire service road, which I followed south. Dawn was breaking as the ranger station came into view. I fabricated a story about getting lost after leaving the marked trail, technically true if incomplete, and was driven back to civilization. That was 6 months ago. I've told no one the full story until writing this account. I've researched missing persons cases in those mountains. 11 hikers disappeared in that region over the past decade. The official explanations cite extreme weather, wildlife attacks, or simply being lost in rugged terrain. I know better. Sometimes I wake thinking I hear that uneven footfall outside my bedroom window. Sometimes the wind carries sounds that might be voice mimicry. And sometimes, most disturbing of all, I find myself studying maps of that wilderness, calculating routes, considering what equipment I'd need for a return journey. Because the creature was right about one thing. I am curious. I do want answers. And part of me is already planning to return. As a veteran outdoor columnist for the Pacific Northwest Explorer, I've documented my fair share of wilderness adventures. But what transpired during my solo expedition to Glacier National Park in Montana during the summer of 2017 was never committed to print. Until now. Some experiences are too personal, too harrowing to share with readers seeking vacation inspiration. I've always been a sucker for the great outdoors. There's something about the crisp mountain air that makes you forget about emails and traffic jams. My trusty RV had carried me through dozens of national parks over the years, but Glacier had always held a special allure with its reputation for pristine wilderness and breathtaking vistas. I arrived at the park on a Tuesday afternoon, eager to set up camp before sunset. The place was breathtaking. Towering peaks capped with snow, pristine lakes reflecting the sky, and dense forests that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The late spring timing meant fewer tourists, allowing me to secure a prime spot near Lake McDonald, not too close to other campers, but within a reasonable distance in case I needed a cup of sugar or someone to share a campfire story with. As I was leveling my RV and setting up my modest camp kitchen, a fellow camper wandered over. He was a tall, lanky guy with a beard that would make a lumberjack jealous. His skin was leathery from years of sun exposure, but his eyes crinkled warmly at the corners when he smiled. "Hey there. Name's Bill," he said, extending a hand weathered by years of outdoor living. "Harvey," I replied, shaking it firmly. "First time up here." His voice had the slight drawl of someone who'd spent considerable time in the Mountain West. "Nah, I've been coming here for years," he continued before I could answer. "Best fishing spot this side of the Mississippi," he said, with a grin that revealed slightly yellowed teeth. We chatted for a bit about the usual: weather, best trails to hike, and the ever-present possibility of bears rummaging through your food stash. Bill seemed to know the park like the back of his hand, pointing out trails that weren't on the standard tourist maps and fishing spots that only the locals know about. "Just remember," Bill said as our conversation wound down, his expression suddenly serious, "the only thing more unpredictable than the wildlife up here is the weather. Keep an eye on the sky." "Will do," I assured him, wondering about the subtle shift in his demeanor. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, I cooked up some dinner. Nothing fancy, just some beans and franks. Gourmet cooking was never my strong suit, but hey, everything tastes better when you're camping. I settled into a folding chair, watching the stars prick through the twilight. It was one of those nights where the sky looked like a spilled jar of glitter. The stillness of the evening was hypnotic. Lake McDonald stretched before me like polished obsidian, reflecting the emerging stars with perfect clarity. The distant peaks were silhouetted against the darkening sky, their snow-capped tops catching the last traces of alpenglow. I was just about to turn in when I heard a rustling in the bushes nearby. Probably a raccoon or some other critter looking for scraps, I thought. But then I heard it again, closer this time. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise. "Who's there?" I called out. Silence. "Great, now I'm talking to squirrels," I muttered. I decided to ignore it and headed inside the RV. Just as I was locking up, I heard footsteps, definitely human footsteps, crunching on the gravel outside. I peered through the window but saw nothing beyond the small circle of light cast by my camp lantern. Maybe it was Bill playing a prank. The footsteps circled my RV once, deliberately slow and measured. I remained perfectly still, watching through the window. On the second pass, they stopped right outside my door. The handle jiggled ever so slightly, as if someone was testing whether I'd locked it. After what seemed like an eternity, the footsteps retreated. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Very funny," I said aloud, trying to convince myself it was just another camper having a laugh. Make a mental note to get back at Bill with a whoopee cushion under his sleeping bag. As I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the RV settling, every whisper of wind through the trees outside sounded like footsteps returning. And beneath it all, I could have sworn I heard something scratching at the metal exterior, soft and persistent, like fingernails seeking entrance. Morning broke with the kind of clarity that makes you question whether the previous night's unease was just your imagination working overtime. Golden sunlight streamed through my RV windows, and the cheerful calls of mountain chickadees replaced the unsettling sounds of the night. I stepped outside, stretching my legs and breathing deeply. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the distant aroma of someone's campfire coffee. I surveyed my surroundings, half expecting to find evidence of my nocturnal visitor, footprints perhaps, or some sign of tampering with my RV. There was nothing out of the ordinary. Well, almost nothing. As I was packing my backpack for a day hike, I noticed something odd. A small carved wooden figure placed on the hood of my RV. It was crudely made, resembling a human but with exaggerated features. A long nose and hollow eyes that seemed to follow me as I moved around it. "Very funny, Bill," I said under my breath. I picked it up and looked around, but there was no sign of anyone. The figure was surprisingly heavy for its size, and warm to the touch despite the morning chill. The wood was dark, almost black, and appeared incredibly old. The carving was primitive yet somehow precise, with intricate patterns etched into what would be the figure's skin. Not random markings, but deliberate symbols I didn't recognize. Something about it made my skin crawl, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. Against my better judgment, I tossed the figure into my backpack, thinking it might make for a good souvenir, or perhaps evidence if Bill's pranks escalated. I set out on the trail, the morning air cool and invigorating. The path wound through thick forests of pine and aspen, occasionally opening up to stunning vistas of valleys below. Birds called to one another overhead, and twice I spotted deer watching me cautiously from between trees. About an hour in, I came across a clearing where I saw another hiker, a woman this time, looking somewhat lost. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she wore hiking gear that had seen better days. "Hey there, you okay?" I called out. She turned abruptly, her face pale. Did you see anyone else around here?" she asked nervously, her eyes darting past me to scan the trail behind. "Just you and the trees," I replied. "Why?" "I thought I was being followed," she said, glancing over her shoulder. Her knuckles were white where she gripped her trekking pole. "Probably just the wind playing tricks," I offered, though I found myself looking over my own shoulder. She didn't look convinced. "Maybe. I'm Karen, by the way." "Harvey, nice to meet you." We chatted for a bit, and I learned she was a wildlife photographer from Colorado who'd been in the park for 3 days already. Something in her manner suggested she was holding back, not telling me everything. "I've been hearing things at night," she finally admitted. "Not animals, voices sometimes, and footsteps around my tent." I hesitated, then told her about my own experience the previous night. "I thought I was going crazy," she said with visible relief. "The rangers just said it was probably raccoons or deer. And what do you think it was?" "I don't know. But this morning, I found this outside my tent." She pulled out a wooden figure from her pocket, identical to the one in my backpack. My blood ran cold. "I found one too," I said, retrieving mine to show her. She examined it, her fingers tracing the strange symbols. "These aren't random carvings," she murmured. "They look ritualistic." "You know what they are?" "I studied anthropology before switching to photography. These symbols resemble some Native American protective totems, but these are different, wrong somehow." I offered to walk with her until our paths diverged. Safety in numbers, right? As we walked, I tried to lighten the mood. "You know, if we get lost out here, at least we'll have a great story to tell. Provided we make it back," I joked. She cracked a smile. "Yeah, and if we don't, we'll at least make the evening news." Local campers vanish in the woods, film at 11. I liked her immediately. There's something about shared fear that bonds people quickly. We continued along the trail, comparing notes on our experiences. Karen had been camping near a place called Bowman Lake, on the quieter western side of the park. "The first night was fine," she said, "but then I started noticing things. Small items moved around my campsite, footprints outside my tent in the morning." "You think someone's stalking you?" She hesitated. "It sounds crazy, but yes, I've been alone in the wilderness dozens of times for my work. I know the difference between animal activity and this." We reached a fork in the trail. Karen was heading toward Avalanche Lake, while I planned to continue on the Hidden Lake Trail. "Be careful out there, Harvey," she said as we parted ways. "And maybe check in with me when you get back, just so I know you made it." We exchanged phone numbers, though we both acknowledged service was spotty at best. I watched her disappear down her chosen path before continuing on mine, the wooden figure now feeling heavier in my pack. The trees grew denser, and the canopy above thickened, allowing only slivers of sunlight to pierce through. I checked my map and compass to make sure I was still on the right path. That's when I heard it. A faint humming sound, almost like a chant. I couldn't make out the words, but it sent a chill down my spine. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the sound. I moved cautiously, the humming growing louder as I approached a hidden clearing. The path I followed wasn't on any map, just a faint game trail winding through increasingly dense underbrush. As I drew closer, a new scent reached me. Wood smoke, yes, but underneath it, something metallic and raw. Peering through the bushes, I saw a small group of people dressed in tattered clothes gathered around a fire. They seemed to be performing some kind of ritual, each holding a wooden figure similar to the one I found. Well, this just got interesting, I whispered to myself. There were 7 of them, 4 men and 3 women, ranging in age from perhaps 30 to 70. Their clothes were modern enough, though dirty and worn. Each wore necklaces made of small bones and teeth that I desperately hoped weren't human. I pulled out my phone to take a picture, but as I zoomed in, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the center of the circle was a body, motionless, and covered in what looked like symbols drawn in red, the same symbols that adorned the wooden figures. This isn't a knitting club, I whispered to myself. The body wasn't moving, but I couldn't tell if the person was dead or merely unconscious. From my vantage point, I could see it was a man in his 20s, probably a hiker given his attire. His chest was bare, marked with the strange symbols, and his eyes were covered with what appeared to be strips of leather. As I tried to back away slowly, I stepped on a dry branch. The snap echoed like a gunshot in the quiet forest. The chanting stopped abruptly. "Who's there?" a deep voice demanded. I didn't wait to find out what would happen if they caught me. I turned and bolted back the way I came, branches whipping against my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear footsteps and shouting. "Get him!" someone yelled. A woman's voice, sharp and commanding. My heart pounded in my chest as I weaved through the trees, branches whipping against my face. Years of hiking had given me decent stamina, but fear lent me speed I didn't know I possessed. The path I'd taken to find them wasn't clear in my mind anymore. Panic has a way of scrambling your mental map. "He has one of the markers," a voice called out. "Don't let him escape with it." Markers? Did they mean the wooden figure? I had half a mind to drop it, to throw it away from me and hope they'd go after it instead. But something told me they wouldn't stop with retrieving their marker. I spotted a fallen log ahead and had a split-second decision to make. I leaped over it, hoping they'd trip if they followed too closely. Luck was on my side. I heard a thud and a curse as at least one of them hit the ground. "Should have tied your shoelaces," I thought grimly. I kept running until I burst out onto a familiar trail. Relief washed over me as I recognized the path back to the campsite. But my relief was short-lived. Standing on the trail ahead was Bill. "Bill, we have to get out of here," I shouted, gasping for breath. "There's a group of people back there doing some kind of ritual. I think they killed someone." He looked at me with an odd expression, head tilted slightly as if considering a mildly interesting puzzle. Then a slow grin spread across his face, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. "Oh, you weren't supposed to see that." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "You city folks never learn," he said, taking a step toward me. His friendly demeanor from yesterday had vanished, replaced by something predatory. "Some things are better left alone." I took a step back. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm just going to leave." "I'm afraid I can't let you do that," he replied, pulling out a hunting knife. The blade was rust-colored, and I didn't think it was actual rust staining the metal. "Is that supposed to scare me?" I blurted out, my mouth moving faster than my brain. He chuckled. "Always appreciate a bit of humor before the hunt." Behind him, I could hear the others approaching, crashing through the underbrush. I was running out of options. "What did you do to that hiker?" I demanded, trying to buy time while scanning for escape routes. "Hiker?" Bill seemed genuinely confused for a moment, then his face cleared. "Oh, you mean the offering. He was necessary. The forest demands tribute. The forest? What are you talking about? Bill's eyes gleamed with a fervor that was terrifying to behold. These woods are ancient, Harvey. They were here long before your national parks and tourist trails. And they hunger. We feed them, and in return, they grant us power. You're insane, I said, though the conviction in his voice sent shivers down my spine. Insanity is ignoring the truth when it stands before you, Bill replied, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality, almost like he was reciting something memorized. The figures connect us to the forest. Each one binds a potential offering. We left one for you. And now, you're marked. I turned and ran down a side path, adrenaline fueling my legs. Behind me, Bill's footsteps were steady, unhurried. You're only making this harder on yourself, he called out. The forest knows your scent now. It will guide us to you, wherever you hide. The side path was overgrown, barely visible. Branches tore at my clothes and skin as I pushed through. I had no idea where I was going, only that I needed to put distance between myself and Bill. The trees around me seemed to crowd closer, their branches reaching like fingers. The path suddenly opened onto another clearing, smaller than the first. And there, to my horror, were more wooden figures, hundreds of them, arranged in concentric circles around a large, flat stone. The stone was stained dark, and I didn't need to be told what had caused those stains. Each figure was unique, with different facial features and body types. With sickening realization, I understood they were meant to represent specific people. Offerings. I skirted the edge of the clearing, unwilling to walk among those wooden sentinels. As I passed, I could have sworn their hollow eyes followed me, their wooden necks creaking as they turned. Do you see now? Bill's voice came from behind me. He stood at the entrance to the clearing, not even breathing hard. This has been going on for generations. My grandfather taught my father, who taught me. We are the keepers of the old ways. You're murderers, I spat. He shook his head, genuinely disappointed. We're caretakers. For every life we take, we save 100. The forest feeds, and in return it keeps the balance. Without us, without the offerings, it would consume everything. I didn't believe him for a second. This was the justification of a madman, a cult leader who'd convinced his followers that their horrific actions served some greater purpose. I spotted a gap in the trees behind the stone altar, another path leading away from the clearing. If I could reach it before Bill caught up to me, I made a dash for it, hearing Bill curse behind me. The new path was steeper, descending rapidly through the forest. I had to slow down to avoid falling, which gave Bill time to close the distance. I've been doing this for 30 years, Bill called out, his voice closer now. No one has ever escaped, not once. I knew he was probably telling the truth. These people had turned murder into a science, perfected over generations. What chance did I have? Then I spotted Karen up ahead, frantically waving at me. This way, she shouted, pointing to a narrow gap between two large boulders. I didn't question it. I sprinted toward her and we ducked behind the cluster of boulders, pressing ourselves against the cold stone. What's going on? I gasped, trying to catch my breath. I saw them too, she whispered, her face pale but determined. They've been tracking campers and hikers, picking us off one by one. Fantastic. And here I thought mosquitoes were the worst thing out here, I said, my default response to terror being inappropriate humor. She gave a grim smile. We need to get to the ranger station. Agreed. Any idea which way that is? About 2 miles east, but we'll have to go off trail. I nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. That guy Bill, he was talking about the forest being hungry, demanding tributes. Karen grimaced. I overheard some of them earlier. They believe they're serving some sort of ancient forest entity, that the wooden figures bind potential victims, making them easier to track and hunt. And you believe that? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. She hesitated. I don't know what to believe anymore, but I found this. She pulled out a small leather-bound notebook from her pocket. It was near their camp. It looks like a journal or record book. I flipped through it quickly. Pages and pages of names, dates, and locations, some with check marks beside them, others with crosses. I realized with horror that these were records of their victims, successful offerings and potential targets. My hands trembled as I recognized recent dates alongside names I'd read in missing persons reports over the years. This wasn't a recent operation. Some entries dated back decades. "We need to get this to the authorities," I said, tucking the notebook into my own pocket. Karen nodded. "That's why I came back. I was halfway to Avalanche Lake when I found their secondary campsite. I knew I had to warn someone." "Well, I'm glad you did. Now let's get the hell out of here before..." "Before what, Harvey?" Bill's voice came from directly above us. He stood on top of the boulder, looking down with that terrible grin. "Before I gut you both like fish?" Karen grabbed my arm, pulling me away. We ran, ducking between trees, trying to lose Bill in the dense forest. But he seemed to know exactly where we were going, cutting us off at every turn. "The forest guides me," he called out, his voice eerily close regardless of how far we ran. "It shows me where you are, where you will be. You can't escape. Keep moving," Karen hissed. "Don't listen to him." We pushed through thick underbrush, thorns scratching our skin, branches tearing at our clothes. The forest seemed to be actively working against us, vines appearing from nowhere to trip our feet, trees shifting to block our path. "Do you see?" Bill laughed somewhere behind us. "The forest protects its own." I was starting to believe him. Nothing about this felt natural. The woods seemed alive in a way that went beyond the normal rustling of leaves and creaking of branches. There was intent here, malevolence. "The figures," I gasped as we ran. "He said they bind us, make us easier to track." Karen's eyes widened. "We need to get rid of them." We both stopped, pulling out the wooden figures from our pockets. Up close, they were even more disturbing. The crude faces seemed to be smiling now, the hollow eyes filled with a dark anticipation. "On 3, Karen said. 1, 2, 3. We threw the figures as far as we could in opposite directions. For a moment, nothing happened. Then we heard Bill swear loudly, his voice suddenly more distant. "It worked," Karen breathed. "Come on." We moved quickly but cautiously, trying to stay hidden while making our way east toward the ranger station. The forest felt different now, still ominous but less actively hostile. The vines no longer reached for our ankles. The branches no longer whipped at our faces. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged near a dirt road. "Almost there," Karen said, pointing to a sign for the ranger station just visible in the distance. Suddenly, a truck roared up, cutting us off. It was an old Ford pickup, rust-eaten and battered. 2 men jumped out, both holding rifles. They weren't wearing the tattered clothes of Bill's group, but their eyes held the same fanatical gleam. "End of the line," one of them sneered. He was younger than Bill, with a patchy beard and a scar running through one eyebrow. I raised my hands. "Look, we don't want any trouble." "Funny, neither do we," the other man said, cocking his rifle. "The forest should have had you by now. We're just helping it along." Karen glanced at me, her eyes conveying a mix of fear and determination. "Got any more of those jokes?" she whispered. "Why did the chicken cross the road?" I muttered. Not helping. Just then a siren blared in the distance. The men exchanged glances. "Rangers," one of them spat. "We'll deal with you later," the other added, giving us a long, considering look. They jumped back into the truck and sped off, tires kicking up dust and gravel. "Saved by the bell," I sighed, watching the truck disappear around a bend. A park ranger's vehicle pulled up moments later. An older man with a stern face stepped out, his hand resting cautiously on his sidearm. "You folks okay?" he asked, eyeing our scratched and disheveled appearance. "Never better," I replied. "Just out for a casual jog being chased by lunatics." He raised an eyebrow. "You want to explain that?" We quickly recounted the events, the wooden figures, the ritual, the chase through the forest. I left out the part about the forest seeming to help Bill and his followers. Some things are too crazy to sound credible, even when everything else is nuts too. The ranger's expression grew more serious as we spoke. "We've had reports of missing campers in the area," he said. "Didn't think it was more than people getting lost, maybe the occasional bear attack." "Well, now you know," Karen said, handing him the notebook we'd found. He flipped through it, his face growing pale. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. He radioed for backup and instructed us to stay with him. Within half an hour, more rangers arrived along with local law enforcement. They organized a search party and we were escorted back to the main campground. As we passed by Bill's campsite, it was completely cleared out. No tent, no gear, no sign he'd ever been there. "Looks like your friend packed up," the ranger noted. "Some friend," I muttered. Over the next few hours, we gave detailed statements. The officers were professional but skeptical, especially when I described Bill's ravings about hungry forests and ancient rituals. "Sounds like your standard backwoods cult," one detective said dismissively. "We get them up here sometimes. People living off the grid too long start making up their own religions." But I knew it was more than that. The way the forest had seemed to help them hunt us, the way the wooden figures had allowed them to track us until we threw them away. There was something supernatural at work here. They asked if we could identify the men we saw. "One of them is named Bill," I said. "Tall, beard, looks like he wrestles bears for fun." "Could be anyone up here," the officer replied. Karen and I exchanged glances. They didn't believe us, not fully. They accepted the parts about a murderous group targeting campers, but not the rest. And maybe that was for the best. Some truths are too strange, too terrifying to be acknowledged. As the sun began to set, the authorities advised us to leave the park for our safety. They would continue the search for Bill and his followers, as well as investigate the locations mentioned in the notebook. "Don't have to tell me twice," I said, packing up my RV with record speed. Karen and I exchanged contact information in the parking lot. Her hands were still shaking slightly, and I suspected mine were too. "Maybe next time we'll choose a beach vacation," she suggested with a weak smile. "Sand castles over serial killers any day," I agreed. As I drove out of the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The forest had seemed so vast, so ancient. If it truly was hungry, if it truly demanded tributes, then Bill and his cult were merely symptoms of a much older, darker problem. I spent the next week in a motel in Missoula, too shaken to drive all the way back to Seattle just yet. I did some digging online about Glacier National Park's history, looking for any patterns that might confirm what we'd experienced. Turns out there had been rumors about a group operating in the area, using the park's remoteness to their advantage. They weren't just hunting animals, they were trafficking illegal goods, and apparently they didn't like witnesses. But dig deeper, and a different pattern emerged. Missing persons reports spanning decades, hikers who vanished without a trace, bodies found with strange symbols carved into their skin, officially attributed to unidentified cult activity. The leader was a man named William Bill Harkins, a notorious figure with a history of violent crimes. He'd managed to evade capture for years, blending in with the very campers and hikers he preyed upon. According to newspaper archives, his family had lived in the area for generations, serving as hunting guides and park employees. Authorities issued a warrant for his arrest, but as far as I know, he's still out there somewhere, moving from one remote location to another. I guess the mountains aren't as peaceful as I thought. A week after our escape, I received a call from Karen. "They found the clearing," she said without preamble. "The one with all the wooden figures." "And?" I held my breath, waiting. "Gone, all of it. They said it looked like the area had been cleared years ago. No signs of recent activity." "That's impossible. We were both there." "I know." Her voice was tight with tension. "And that's not all. Remember the notebook? The one with all the names?" "Of course." "The pages are blank now, every single one." I felt a chill run through me. "What are you saying?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I'm not going camping again. Not ever." I couldn't blame her. I sold my RV the next day, taking a significant loss just to be rid of it. Some memories you don't want to keep around. The authorities eventually closed the case. Without physical evidence, the figures gone, the clearing disappeared, the notebook blank. They had nothing but our testimonies. And who would believe two traumatized hikers talking about sentient forests and magical wooden tokens? I moved back to Seattle and threw myself into my work, writing fluffy travel pieces about safe, populated tourist destinations. Karen and I kept in touch, checking in with each other monthly, then weekly after nightmares started plaguing us both. In my dreams, I'm back in those woods. Only now, I'm not running from Bill and his followers. I'm one of them. I hold a wooden figure in my hand, my fingers tracing the symbols carved into its surface, and somehow, I understand what they mean. I wake up sweating, the symbols still clear in my mind. Sometimes, I find myself drawing them absent-mindedly while on phone calls or watching TV. 3 months after our escape, Karen sent me a news clipping. A family of 4 had gone missing in Olympic National Park. The only trace authorities found was their empty campsite, and according to one ranger quoted in the article, strange wooden carvings left behind. Last week, I found something on my doorstep. A small wooden figure crudely carved with a long nose and hollow eyes. I recognized the craftsmanship immediately. The same elongated limbs, the same hollow eyes, the same symbols etched into its wooden skin. And for a moment, just a moment, I could have sworn it smiled at me. I've moved 3 times since Glacier, changed my phone number, even changed my name. But they always find me. The wooden figures keep appearing, on my doorstep, in my mailbox, once even on the pillow beside me while I slept. The forest is patient. The forest is hungry, and sometimes in the darkest hours of the night, I hear Bill's voice whispering to me, carried on the wind through my closed windows. The forest remembers Harvey, and it's still waiting for its tribute. It was late November 2018, when the Tennessee mountains begin their slow surrender to winter. The dampness in the air carried that distinct smell of decaying leaves and wet soil, while the temperature hovered just low enough to make you grateful for a good jacket. I remember the date precisely because it marked the beginning of what I now call my sleepless season. My name is John, and I've lived in these mountains most of my life. Our house, a weathered 2-story wooden structure that's been in the family for generations, sits nestled among tall pines about 15 miles from the nearest town. The isolation never bothered me. In fact, I preferred it. My mother worked double shifts at the regional hospital, meaning I often had the place to myself for days at a time. The nearest neighbors lived about half a mile down the winding dirt road, an elderly couple who kept to themselves save for the occasional courtesy wave. On that particular Tuesday evening, I was sorting through bills at the kitchen table when my phone vibrated against the wooden surface. Joe's name flashed across the screen. We'd been friends since middle school, bonded by our mutual interest in video games and an appreciation for solitude that most of our peers couldn't understand. "Mike, I need to get out of the city," were his first words when I answered. The background noise suggested he was at his apartment downtown. Cars honking, neighbors arguing through thin walls. "This place is suffocating me. Mind if I come up for a few days?" "You know you're always welcome," I replied, glancing at the calendar. Mom was on a 3-day shift rotation, which meant the house would be empty except for us. "When were you thinking?" "Today?" The desperation in his voice was palpable. Something about his tone suggested more than the usual city fatigue. "I can be ready in an hour." I agreed without hesitation. Joe had always been there for me, and besides, I welcomed the company. The house felt different lately, larger somehow, with shadows that seemed to linger in corners longer than they should. "I'll drive down and get you," I offered, already reaching for my keys. "It'll be dark by the time we get back, but we can stop for supplies on the way." As I hung up, I couldn't shake the feeling that Joe's visit would be different this time. The mountains had secrets, whispers that traveled through the trees, but I dismissed these thoughts as I locked the front door behind me. The ancient porch steps creaked beneath my weight, a sound I'd heard thousands of times, yet today it resonated with an unfamiliar hollowness. Little did I know that within 24 hours, that familiar sound would become a warning. The drive into the city passed quickly. Traffic was light, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the highway. When I arrived at Joe's apartment complex, he was already waiting outside, a duffel bag at his feet and a backpack slung over one shoulder. His face brightened when he saw my truck pull up. "You look terrible," I observed as he threw his bags into the back seat. Joe ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "Haven't been sleeping well. The neighbors have been loud." He hesitated, as if deciding whether to elaborate. "Thanks for this, Mike. I really needed to get away." We spent the next couple of hours in the city, stopping first at a gaming store where Joe picked up a few new releases he'd been waiting for. "These should keep us busy for a few days," he said, examining the back of one case. His enthusiasm seemed forced, but I didn't press him. After grabbing dinner at our favorite burger place, we stocked up on essentials at the supermarket. Chips, soda, microwave meals, and enough coffee to fuel our planned all-night gaming sessions. The normalcy of these routines settled us both. By the time we were heading back to the mountains, Joe seemed more like himself, chatting about work and asking about Mom. The sun had completely disappeared by 6:30 p.m., leaving us driving through darkness broken only by my truck's headlights. The radio signal gradually deteriorated as we ascended, static interrupting the classic rock station until I finally switched it off. Light rain began to fall, creating hypnotic patterns on the windshield. "Still as remote as ever," Joe commented as we turned onto the dirt road leading to my house. The trees crowded close to the path here, branches occasionally scraping against the side of the truck. "How do you not go crazy out here alone?" I shrugged. "You get used to it. Besides, the quiet helps me think." As we rounded the final bend, my headlights swept across the front of the house. For a split second, I thought I saw movement on the porch, a quick shadow darting out of the light's reach. I slowed the truck, squinting through the rain-speckled windshield. "What is it?" Joe asked, following my gaze. "Nothing," I replied after a moment. "Probably just a raccoon. They've been getting bold lately." We pulled up to the house and quickly unloaded our supplies, making several trips through the light rain. The air felt unusually still despite the weather, as if the forest were holding its breath. Inside, the house was cold. I turned up the thermostat and flipped on lights in every room, dispelling the darkness that had accumulated during my absence. "Let's get set up in the living room," I suggested, already unpacking the gaming console. "We can push the couch against the wall and use the coffee table for snacks." For the next few hours, we fell into familiar patterns, connecting cables, arguing over game choices, and setting up the perfect arrangement for our marathon session. The rain continued outside, a gentle percussion against the windows. By 10 p.m., we had created our haven of technology within the old wooden house, the television's glow casting strange shadows across the walls. I pushed open the window a few inches to let in fresh air. The room had grown stuffy with our activity, and the cool mountain breeze was welcome. Outside, the darkness was absolute. The forest beyond my small backyard was a wall of black, impenetrable, and vast. Neither of us mentioned the unsettling feeling that had begun to creep in with the night. Instead, we launched into our first game. The volume turned high enough to drown out the sounds of the mountain, almost. The movie we'd chosen was some indie horror film Joe had insisted was actually scary, not like that mainstream garbage. The plot was predictable: vacationing college students, an abandoned cabin, the usual setup, but well executed enough to hold our attention. We were about 40 minutes in when I first heard it. Clink. A metallic sound, faint but distinct, coming from the direction of the woods beyond the backyard. It reminded me of two pieces of metal gently tapping together, like a wind chime made of steel instead of aluminum. But we didn't have wind chimes, and the sound was too deliberate, too measured. Joe reached for the remote and paused the movie. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the partially open window. I nodded, trying to rationalize it. Probably just something loose on the shed. The wind picks up at night sometimes. We remained silent, listening. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a damp stillness that amplified every small noise. Just as I was about to dismiss it, the sound came again. Clink. Slightly louder this time, as if whatever was creating it had moved closer to the house. "Wind, huh?" Joe raised an eyebrow. "Must be the tin roof on the shed," I insisted, though uncertainty had begun to creep into my voice. "It expands and contracts with the temperature." We resumed the movie, but my attention had shifted. Rather than focusing on the screen, I found myself straining to hear above the dialogue, waiting for that metallic sound to return. 20 minutes passed in this heightened state of awareness before it came again. Clink, clink. This time there was no mistaking it. The sound was louder, more insistent, and definitely closer to the house. It reminded me of someone tapping a metal baseball bat against a tree trunk. Casual, almost playful, but with an underlying purpose that made my skin prickle. "Okay, that's not the shed," Joe whispered, unnecessarily lowering his voice. "It sounds like it's moving." I reached for the remote and lowered the volume of the movie to a near whisper, not pausing it this time. "Let's act normal," I suggested, though my heart had begun to beat faster. It's probably just an animal investigating something shiny. But we both knew better. Animals don't create rhythmic metallic sounds. Animals don't slowly circle a house in the dark. For the next half hour, we pretended to watch the movie while focusing all our attention on the sounds outside. The metallic tapping continued, seemingly moving around the perimeter of the house, first near the back woods, then along the side yard, always keeping its distance, but making its presence known. "Should we call someone?" Joe asked during a particularly quiet scene in the movie. "Call who? The sheriff's station is 40 minutes away. By the time anyone got here, whatever it is would be long gone." I tried to sound rational, but the truth was I'd reached for my phone twice already, only to realize how ridiculous I would sound. "Hello, police?" "There's a strange clinking sound outside my house." "No, I haven't seen anything. Yes, I live in the woods." The metallic sound gradually decreased in frequency, and I found myself relaxing slightly, convincing myself it had been nothing to worry about. But as the movie reached its climax, with the final surviving character making their desperate escape, the sound changed. No longer a gentle clinking, it had transformed into a deliberate rhythmic tapping, like Morse code sent via metal on wood, and it was coming from directly beneath the open window. "Turn off the TV," I whispered, reaching for the remote. The screen went black, plunging the room into near darkness. Only the small lamp in the corner remained lit, casting weak yellow light that barely reached the center of the room. The tapping continued, now with a distinct pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, 2 slower taps, another pause, then repeat. The sound wasn't just random noise, it was communication. Joe and I exchanged glances, a wordless agreement passing between us. Moving as quietly as possible, we positioned ourselves on either side of the window. The curtains were partially drawn, giving us cover while allowing a narrow view of the yard. "On 3, I mouthed, holding up my fingers to count. 1, 2, 3. We both leaned forward simultaneously, peering out into the darkness. The floodlight mounted on the side of the house illuminated a small portion of the yard, creating a pool of yellowish light that ended abruptly at the tree line. Within that illuminated space, there was nothing unusual, just wet grass and the gravel path leading to the shed. But at the edge of the light, where darkness began, something moved. It wasn't a clear sighting, just a disturbance in the shadows, a shifting that suggested mass and intent. Whatever it was, it retreated further into the darkness as soon as we appeared at the window. The tapping stopped. "Did you see that?" Joe's voice was barely audible. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. My eyes remained fixed on the point where I'd seen the movement, trying to distinguish form from shadow. The longer I stared, the more my vision played tricks on me, creating shapes where there were none. "What do we do?" Joe asked, still whispering despite the closed window between us and whatever waited outside. I considered our options. Calling for help wasn't practical given our location. Ignoring it seemed impossible now that we'd acknowledged its presence. That left confrontation. "We need to know what we're dealing with," I said finally, moving away from the window. "I'm going to grab some flashlights. You stay here and watch the yard." The hallway to the kitchen seemed longer than usual, the shadows deeper. I fumbled in the drawer for the heavy mag light I kept for power outages and a smaller backup flashlight. On impulse, I also grabbed a kitchen knife, slipping it into my back pocket. The weight of it against my spine was simultaneously reassuring and terrifying. a tacit admission that I believed we might be in danger. When I returned to the living room, Joe was still at the window, his face tense with concentration. "Anything?" I asked, handing him the smaller flashlight. He shook his head. "It's completely still out there now. But Mike, I don't think we're alone." I took a deep breath. "I know. Let's check it out. Are you serious? Shouldn't we just lock everything and wait it out? If someone's out there, I want to know why." I tried to project confidence I didn't feel. "Besides, I've lived here my whole life. I know these woods." That wasn't entirely true. No one truly knows the woods at night. The familiar landscape transforms after dark, turning benign landmarks into looming threats and creating hiding places where none existed by day. Nevertheless, I led the way to the front door, switching on my flashlight before stepping onto the porch. The air outside was colder now, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. Our breath formed small clouds in the beam of light. "We'll check the floodlight first," I decided, pointing toward the side of the house where we'd seen the movement. "Stay close." We moved carefully around the house, our flashlights sweeping the ground before us. Every step crunched against gravel or squelched in mud, sounding impossibly loud in the stillness. As we approached the side yard, I noticed the floodlight seemed dimmer than usual, its illumination wavering slightly. "Something's wrong with the light," Joe observed, voicing my thoughts. We drew closer, and the reason became immediately apparent. The bulb hadn't burned out. It had been partially unscrewed, just enough to create an intermittent connection that caused the light to flicker. "No animal did that," Joe stated flatly. I reached up and tightened the bulb, restoring the steady glow. As the light stabilized, it revealed fresh indentations in the mud beneath, footprints partially filled with water but unmistakably human. The metallic sound suddenly resumed, this time from the direction of the woods. Clink, clink, clink. Deliberate, mocking. Our flashlights swung toward the tree line in unison, cutting through the darkness to reveal nothing. Just trees and underbrush and the impenetrable black beyond our beam's reach. But the sound continued, moving parallel to the edge of the woods, always just outside our field of vision. "It's leading us," Joe whispered, his flashlight tracking the noise. He was right. Whatever created the sound was deliberately staying ahead of us, drawing us toward the woods. A trap, perhaps, or a game where we didn't know the rules. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rain returned. Not a gentle mist this time, but a downpour that reduced visibility to mere feet. Water streamed down our faces, soaking through our clothes in seconds. "Back inside," I shouted, over the roar of rain on leaves. "Now!" We retreated to the house, locking the door behind us. Soaked and shivering, we stood in the entryway, listening to the storm's assault on the roof. "What the hell was that?" Joe demanded, wiping water from his eyes. "Someone unscrewed your floodlight, Mike. Someone is out there playing some kind of sick game with us." I had no answer that made sense. Rural Tennessee had its share of strange occurrences, hunters who strayed onto private property, occasional trespassers looking for abandoned buildings to explore, even the rare meth lab hidden deep in the woods. But this felt personal, targeted. "Let's get dried off," I suggested, heading for the linen closet. "Then we need to make sure every door and window is locked." As I handed Joe a towel, a new sound rose above the rainfall. Footsteps on the porch, heavy and deliberate, directly outside the front door. The footsteps stopped just short of the door. No knock followed, no call identifying the visitor, just the weight of a presence on the other side of the wooden barrier. Joe and I froze in place, dripping water onto the floor, our eyes locked on the doorknob. I held my breath, straining to detect any further movement. After what seemed like minutes, a slow creaking sound emerged, not from the door, but from the floorboards of the porch, as if whoever stood there was gradually shifting their weight from one foot to another. "Should we see who it is?" Joe whispered. I shook my head emphatically. Something about the situation felt profoundly wrong. Normal visitors don't lurk silently on porches in the middle of a rainstorm. Then came the knocking, not the casual rap of a neighbor or friend, but 3 measured strikes against the wood, so forceful that the door visibly shuddered in its frame. The pattern matched the metallic tapping we'd heard earlier. 3 quick knocks, a pause, 2 slower ones. My hand instinctively moved to my back pocket, fingers wrapping around the handle of the kitchen knife. The weight of it was suddenly inadequate against whatever waited outside. "We know you're in there." The voice that came through the door was male, unfamiliar, and unnervingly calm. "We just want to talk." We, not I. There was more than one. "What do you want?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response came from the other side of the door. Instead, the porch creaked again as weight shifted away from the entrance. Footsteps circled around the side of the house, the same side where we'd found the loosened floodlight. Joe grabbed my arm. "Did he say we?" he hissed. I nodded, moving toward the living room window that overlooked the side yard. Carefully, I peered through the glass, expecting to see a figure in the floodlight's glow. The yard was empty, but the floodlight itself was now completely dark. "They unscrewed it again," I murmured, an inexplicable dread settling into my stomach. This wasn't random mischief. It was calculated intimidation. A sudden bang against the wall made us both jump. It came from directly below the window where we'd first heard the metallic sounds. A deliberate, violent strike that resonated through the house's wooden frame. Bang, bang, bang. The impacts continued, moving around the perimeter of the house as if someone were testing the structure, looking for weaknesses. Each strike was followed by scratching sounds, fingernails or perhaps a tool dragging across the wooden siding. "This is insane," Joe whispered, backing toward the center of the room. "We need to call for help." I pulled out my phone, already knowing what I would find. In these mountains, cell service was spotty at best, non-existent during storms. Sure enough, no signal bars appeared on the screen. "Landline," I muttered, moving toward the kitchen where the old corded phone hung on the wall. It rarely saw use anymore, but Mom had insisted on keeping it active for emergencies. I lifted the receiver to my ear, relieved to hear the dial tone. Quickly, I punched in 911, counting each ring as I waited for a response. 1, 2, 3. On the 4th ring, the line connected. But instead of a dispatcher's voice, I heard only breathing, steady, deliberate breaths that sent ice through my veins. "Hello?" I said cautiously, even though I knew this wasn't the emergency services. The breathing continued for several seconds before a voice responded. The same voice from the porch, now intimately close through the phone line. "We cut the line a mile down the road," it said matter-of-factly. "But we left just enough connection for this call." Clever, right? I slammed the receiver down, my hand trembling. "What is it?" Joe asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "They cut the phone line," I replied, trying to process the implications. "They planned this. They knew exactly what we would do." The banging against the walls had stopped during my brief call, leaving the house in unnatural silence. Even the rain seemed to have quieted, as if nature itself were holding its breath in anticipation of what would come next. "We need a weapon," Joe said, no longer bothering to whisper. "Something better than kitchen knives." I nodded, already moving toward my mother's bedroom. She keeps a gun in her nightstand. She made me learn how to use it when I started staying here alone. Mom's room was at the far end of the hallway, its door slightly ajar. I pushed it open, fumbling for the light switch. Nothing happened when I flipped it. "Power's out in this room," I muttered, using my flashlight to navigate toward the bedside table. The beam illuminated familiar surroundings. The neatly made bed, the framed photographs on the dresser, the row of medical textbooks on the shelf. Everything appeared normal until my light reached the window opposite the door. The curtains were open, and pressed against the glass was a face, pale, expressionless, watching us through the darkness. I staggered backward, nearly colliding with Joe. The face remained motionless, features indistinct in the darkness but unmistakably human. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity, neither of us moving. Then, slowly, deliberately, the figure raised a hand and pressed it flat against the glass. Long fingers spread wide, leaving smudged impressions on the window pane. "The gun," Joe urged, his voice barely audible. "Get the gun, Mike." Moving by instinct rather than conscious thought, I crossed to the nightstand, keeping my flashlight trained on the window. The figure hadn't moved, continuing its silent observation. The drawer slid open easily, revealing the 9mm handgun my mother had purchased after a series of break-ins targeted isolated homes in the area last year. I'd fired it only twice, once when she first showed me how to use it, and again at the makeshift range we'd set up behind the shed. My fingers closed around the grip, the metal cool against my palm. I checked the magazine, fully loaded, just as Mom always kept it. The weight of the weapon steadied my nerves somewhat, giving me a sense of control I'd been lacking since the first metallic sounds. When I looked back at the window, the face was gone. "Where did he go?" Joe whispered, scanning the darkness outside. I moved to the window, careful to approach from the side rather than directly in front. The glass was intact, but the handprint remained, a ghostly impression left behind like a signature. From this vantage point, I could see part of the backyard, including the corner of the shed approximately 50 yards from the house. The structure was little more than a storage space for gardening tools and outdoor equipment, its weathered boards and rusted metal roof a fixture of my childhood. Movement caught my eye, a shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness beside the shed. The figure stood there, clearly visible now despite the distance and rain, watching the house with unnatural stillness. "I see him," I murmured, adjusting my grip on the gun. "By the shed." Joe joined me at the window, careful to stay partially concealed behind the curtain. "What's he doing?" "Just standing there, watching." We observed in tense silence as the figure remained motionless for nearly a minute. Then, with deliberate slowness, it raised an arm and pointed directly at us, a gesture so precise there could be no doubt it knew exactly where we were despite the darkness of the room. "He can see us," Joe whispered unnecessarily. I nodded, fighting the urge to back away from the window. Logic dictated that the darkness inside should conceal us, but somehow this intruder knew our exact position. The realization sent a wave of vulnerability through me, unlike anything I'd experienced before. The figure lowered its arm and began walking, not away toward the woods, but directly toward the house. Its gait was unhurried, almost casual, splashing through puddles without concern. "He's coming this way," Joe hissed, genuine fear breaking through his usual composure. I raised the gun instinctively, though I knew I couldn't fire through the closed window at this distance with any accuracy. "Let's get back to the living room," I decided. "We can see all approaches from there." We backed out of the bedroom, keeping our flashlights trained ahead of us. The hallway seemed longer and narrower than usual, the shadows between light beams deeper and more menacing. In the living room, we positioned ourselves strategically, Joe watching the front door and windows, me covering the rear of the house where we'd seen the figure. The gun remained in my hand, safety off, finger resting alongside the trigger, just as Mom had taught me. Minutes passed with excruciating slowness. The rain continued its assault on the roof, occasional gusts of wind causing the house to creak and settle. But no footsteps approached. No knocking resumed. "Maybe he changed his mind," Joe suggested after nearly 15 minutes of silence. I shook my head. "No, he's playing with us." As if to confirm my assessment, the metallic clinking sound resumed, this time from multiple directions simultaneously. It surrounded the house, coming from the front porch, the side yard, the backwoods, all at once. "There's more than one," Joe whispered, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. The sounds continued, gradually synchronizing until they formed a unified rhythm. Clink, 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 like a heartbeat made of metal, pulsing around us. And then, abruptly, they stopped. In the sudden silence, I became aware of movement in the backyard, a figure emerging from behind the shed once more. But this time, it wasn't alone. Two additional shapes flanked it, emerging from the tree line on either side. "Mike," Joe's voice cracked slightly. "Mike, there's 3 of them now." I moved to his side, staring out at the yard where the 3 figures had formed a loose semicircle facing the house. They maintained perfect stillness, like statues placed in the rain. "What do they want?" Joe whispered, the question directed more to himself than to me. I had no answer, but a terrible certainty was forming in my mind. This wasn't a random intrusion or opportunistic break-in. These people, whoever they were, had targeted us specifically. They had planned this, prepared for it, executed it with precision. One of the figures stepped forward, separating from the others. In its hand glinted something metallic, the source of the clinking sounds we'd been hearing. I couldn't identify the object from this distance, but its purpose became clear as the figure raised it and struck it against what appeared to be a small rod or pipe. Clink. The sound rang out, clearer now that we could see its source. The figure waited a moment, then struck again. Clink. A signal, a summons. From the woods behind them, more shapes began to emerge. One, then two, then several more, until at least 8 figures stood in my backyard. A silent assembly facing the house in the pouring rain. "We need to barricade ourselves," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Help me move the couch against the front door." Joe snapped out of his stunned paralysis, helping me drag the heavy furniture across the room. We positioned it firmly against the entrance, then proceeded to secure the windows, closing and locking each one, drawing curtains, and in some cases pushing bookshelves against them for additional protection. "What about the back door?" Joe asked as we finished with the living room windows. "Kitchen, through here." We moved quickly through the house, securing each potential entry point. The back door, a solid wood construction with a deadbolt, was our final target. As I turned the lock, a sound from outside froze me in place. Footsteps on the back porch, multiple sets. "They're right outside," I whispered, backing away from the door. "Back to the living room, now." We retreated to our makeshift fortress, positioning ourselves behind the overturned dining table we'd arranged as a barrier. The gun felt inadequate against so many intruders, but it was our only substantial defense. "Should we try to reason with them?" Joe suggested, his voice tight with stress. "Find out what they want?" I considered this briefly. Normal logic suggested communication might diffuse the situation, but nothing about this night had followed normal patterns. These people had methodically isolated us, intimidated us, and surrounded us. They weren't here to talk. Before I could respond, a new sound emerged. The distinct scrape of metal against metal from the direction of the back door. Someone was picking the lock. "They're breaking in," Joe whispered unnecessarily. I raised the gun, aiming at the hallway that led to the kitchen. If they came through that door, they would have to pass this point to reach us. The scraping continued for several minutes, occasionally punctuated by low murmurs from outside, too quiet to distinguish words, but clearly human voices conferring. Then, abruptly, the sound ceased. Silence fell over the house again, heavy and expectant. I kept the gun trained on the hallway, waiting for the inevitable breach. Instead, a sharp crack came from the front of the house, the sound of splintering wood as someone attacked the front door directly. "They're trying to force their way in," Joe hissed, turning toward the new threat. The assault on the front door continued, measured, powerful strikes that gradually increased in intensity. The couch we'd positioned as a barricade shuddered with each impact, inching backward across the floor despite its weight. Crack. Another hit, stronger than the others. A thin fracture appeared in the wooden door, visible even through the slats of the couch. Crack. The fracture widened, spreading like a lightning bolt across the aged wood. Crack. The door frame splintered, creating a gap just wide enough for fingers to grip the edge. Through that narrow opening, a hand appeared, pale, mud-streaked, and methodically working to widen the breach. Without hesitation, I aimed and fired. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, leaving a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The hand disappeared instantly, accompanied by a pained shout from outside. "I hit him," I said, my voice sounding distant through the ringing. "But they'll be back." Joe nodded grimly, his face illuminated by our flashlights in the otherwise dark room. "What now?" Before I could answer, a cacophony of banging erupted, not just at the front door, but from all sides of the house simultaneously. They were attacking every potential entrance at once, a coordinated assault we couldn't possibly defend against. The windows rattled in their frames as objects struck them from outside, not hard enough to break the glass, but with sufficient force to create a constant, disorienting noise. The walls themselves seemed to vibrate with the impacts, as if the entire house were under siege. I fired again toward the damaged front door, then swung around to fire at a window where the curtain had been pushed aside by something outside. Glass shattered, followed by a quick shadow retreating from view. They're testing our defenses, I realized aloud, seeing where we'll shoot. The banging continued unabated, a psychological tactic as much as a physical one. It became harder to track individual sounds or focus on specific threats as the noise surrounded us. I fired again at a shape visible through a side window, then once more at movement near the back hallway. 4 shots fired, 5 remaining in the magazine. "Save your ammunition," Joe warned, tracking movement with his flashlight. "They're trying to make you waste it." He was right. I lowered the gun slightly, focusing instead on identifying genuine threats rather than responding to every shadow and sound. The assault on the house continued for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes. When it finally ceased, the silence was almost as disorienting as the noise had been. "What are they doing now?" Joe whispered. I strained to hear any movement outside, any clue to our attackers' next move. For several long moments, there was nothing. Then a sound so unexpected it took me seconds to identify it. Laughter. Low, amused laughter from somewhere just outside the living room window. "They're playing with us," Joe said, his voice hollow. The laughter faded, replaced by footsteps circling the house once more, unhurried, almost casual in their rhythm. I moved to the window, carefully peering through a crack in the curtains. The yard appeared empty at first glance, but as my eyes adjusted, I detected movement near the tree line. The figures were retreating, melting back into the forest one by one until only a single silhouette remained, standing at the edge of the woods. This last figure raised a hand, not in threat, but in what almost seemed like farewell. Then it too disappeared into the darkness. "They're leaving," I said, unable to fully believe it. Just like that. Joe joined me at the window, disbelief evident in his expression. "Why? Why do all this and then just leave?" I had no answer that made sense. We remained in position for nearly an hour, waiting for them to return, for the siege to resume. But only silence and darkness greeted us. Eventually, exhaustion began to override adrenaline. I checked and rechecked every entry point, confirming that nothing had been breached besides the damaged front door, which we reinforced with a bookcase. "We should take shifts," I suggested, though I doubted either of us would sleep. "I'll watch first." Joe nodded, settling onto the floor with his back against the wall, flashlight within easy reach. Despite his stated intention to rest, his eyes remained open, scanning the room constantly. I maintained my vigil by the window, gun in hand, watching the tree line for any sign of our tormentor's return. The rain gradually subsided, leaving behind a heavy mist that shrouded the yard in ghostly white. As dawn approached, the first faint light revealed an empty yard, undisturbed except for numerous footprints in the mud. Physical evidence that the night's events had not been a shared hallucination. What we couldn't determine, what I still don't know to this day, was why they came, and why they left without completing whatever dark purpose had brought them to my door. Morning arrived with deceptive normalcy. Birds singing, sunlight filtering through the trees, the smell of damp earth rising from the ground. Joe and I moved through the house in a daze, surveying the damage in daylight. The front door was splintered beyond repair, its frame cracked and warped. 3 windows had been broken, their glass littering the floors inside. The walls bore numerous dents and scratches, testament to the coordinated assault we'd endured. "We should call the sheriff," Joe suggested, his voice hoarse from our sleepless night. I nodded, picking up my cell phone. Signal bars had returned with the morning light. The call connected immediately. A dispatcher's professional tone a surreal contrast to our current situation. I reported the events as coherently as possible, though even to my own ears, the story sounded fantastical. Multiple assailants surrounding an isolated house, communicating with metallic signals, coordinating a psychological siege before disappearing without explanation. It stretched credibility despite being the unvarnished truth. "Deputies will be there within the hour," the dispatcher assured me. "Please don't touch anything that might be evidence." We waited on the porch, the damaged door propped open behind us. The gun remained within reach, though logic suggested our mysterious visitors wouldn't return in daylight. Still, every rustle of leaves or distant sound brought an instant response. Heads turning, bodies tensing, ready for a threat that didn't materialize. When the sheriff's cruiser finally appeared on our dirt road, the sense of relief was overwhelming. 2 deputies emerged, expressions serious but skeptical as they surveyed the property. "You boys had quite a night," the older deputy observed, examining the splintered doorframe. His tone carried an undercurrent of doubt, though he maintained professional courtesy. We led them through the house, pointing out the damage and explaining the sequence of events. They took photographs, collected evidence where possible, and recorded our statements with practiced efficiency. "We'll check the phone line," the younger deputy promised. "If it was cut like you said, that'll tell us something." They spent nearly 2 hours at the property, their initial skepticism gradually giving way to concern as the physical evidence supported our account. Before leaving, they promised increased patrols in the area and gave us a direct number to call if the intruders returned. "Lock up as best you can," the older deputy advised. "Might want to stay somewhere else for a few days, though." After they left, Joe and I sat in silence, the adrenaline that had sustained us finally ebbing away, leaving bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. "I'm getting us a hotel room in town," Joe decided, already searching on his phone. "We're not spending another night here until your mom gets back." I didn't argue. The house felt fundamentally changed, no longer the safe haven of my childhood, but a vulnerable shelter that had been violated in ways I still couldn't fully comprehend. We packed essentials quickly, neither of us wanting to remain any longer than necessary. As Joe loaded his bag into my truck, I made a final walk through the house, securing it as best I could given the damaged entrances. In my mother's room, I paused at the window where we'd first seen the face watching us. The handprint remained on the glass, 5 fingers splayed wide, now clearly visible in daylight. I studied it for a moment, then reached out and placed my own hand beside it. The intruder's print was considerably larger than mine, the fingers unnaturally long and thin. It confirmed what I'd suspected but hadn't voiced. Whoever these people were, they weren't from around here. Not neighbors, not locals with a grudge, not teenagers playing elaborate pranks. They were something else entirely. I withdrew my hand, wiping the glass clean with my sleeve, erasing the evidence of their presence in this most personal space. The action felt significant somehow, a small reclamation of territory. The drive to town passed in contemplative silence, both of us processing the night's events in our own way. The hotel was unremarkable. Clean, anonymous, secure. Everything our experience in the mountains had not been. That evening, the sheriff called with an update. The phone line had indeed been cut approximately a mile from our house, confirming at least part of our story. They'd found no identifiable fingerprints or other evidence that might lead to the intruders, however. "We'll keep looking," he promised. Though his tone suggested limited resources and competing priorities would eventually relegate our case to the unsolved files. Mom returned 3 days later. We told her everything, expecting disbelief, but finding instead grim understanding. Rural isolation carried risks she'd always acknowledged. She didn't question our account or minimize our fear. Instead, she made immediate, practical changes: a security system installation, motion-activated lights around the property's perimeter, reinforced doors and windows. Joe returned to the city the following week, carrying with him an experience that had fundamentally altered our friendship. We had shared something profound and inexplicable, a violation that went beyond the physical damage to the house, touching something primal in both of us. As for me, I remained in the mountains, in the house that had always been home. The security upgrades provided a semblance of safety, though I knew them to be largely symbolic. If our visitors decided to return, No amount of technology would truly stop them. They never came back, at least not in the same way. Sometimes on particularly quiet nights, I still hear that metallic sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable. Clink, clink, clink. Always from the direction of the woods, always just at the edge of perception. I don't investigate anymore. I don't peer through windows or venture outside with flashlights. Instead, I simply acknowledge their presence, a respectful distance maintained between their world and mine. Perhaps that's what they wanted all along. Not to harm us, but to establish boundaries, to demonstrate capabilities, to ensure we understood that the isolation we thought protected us actually made us vulnerable. It's been nearly 7 years since that November night. The house has been repaired, the physical evidence long since erased. But I never open the windows after dark anymore, especially when it rains, and I always make sure the floodlights are securely fastened before the sun goes down. Some lessons, once learned, are impossible to forget. I live in the suburbs of Budapest, Hungary, in a small town about 15 minutes from the city. They call it a town, but really it's just an overgrown village with narrow streets and closely packed houses. The atmosphere here is distinctly provincial. Everyone knows everyone. Rumors spread faster than wildfire, and strangers are noticed immediately. Lighting at night is scarce, but our street is reasonably well lit. This detail would become crucial to my experience. In spring of 2019, our apartment needed renovation. The walls of my bedroom had developed moisture problems, with dark patches appearing at an alarming rate. The landlord finally agreed to have it repainted and treated for mold. This meant I had to temporarily relocate to our guest bedroom while the work was being done. The guest bedroom was considerably smaller than my regular room, almost claustrophobic. It contained only a single bed, a small desk with a chair, and a narrow wardrobe. What made this room different was its large window facing the street, providing a clear view of the neighbors' houses opposite. Our apartment occupied the first floor of a 2-story building with a spacious garden behind it. My regular bedroom overlooked this garden, but the guest room faced the front, exposing me to the street life I rarely paid attention to. The first night was uncomfortable. The bed felt too firm. The street lamps cast strange shadows across the ceiling, and occasional car headlights swept across the walls. I tossed and turned, unable to find comfort in this unfamiliar space. Around 2 a.m, I finally drifted into uneasy sleep. I remember thinking how temporary this arrangement would be, just a week, the workers had promised. How naive I was, how utterly unprepared for what would transpire in this tiny room, with its large window, like an unblinking eye staring out at the darkened street below. On the third night in the guest bedroom, my chronic insomnia struck with particular intensity. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 2:37 a.m., and I had been staring at the ceiling for hours. The house had gone quiet long ago. Even the usual ambient sounds of the building had faded to nothing, leaving me in a bubble of silence. Then I heard it. A strange, rhythmic sound from outside, a steady, heavy thudding. At first, I assumed it was music from one of the neighbors, though it seemed odd for someone to be playing anything so loud at this hour. But this sound followed no recognizable pattern or melody. It was mechanical, methodical, like footsteps, but heavier and more deliberate than any human's walk could be. And it was getting louder. Curiosity overcame caution. I slipped out of bed and moved to the window, standing just at the edge where the streetlight cast its orange glow. The street appeared empty at first, but then a movement caught my eye. A figure was walking down the center of the street. Even from a distance, something about its proportions seemed wrong. As it came closer, illuminated by the street lamps, I realized why. This figure was impossibly tall. I live on the first floor, yet I had to crane my neck to see its head. It must have been at least 6 meters tall. The figure appeared humanoid, but with disturbing differences. Its skin was a uniform gray, smooth and without texture. Its head had no discernible facial features, No eyes, nose, or mouth that I could detect. Most alarming were its arms, 4 of them. 2 hung normally from its shoulders, while another pair protruded from around its midsection. Despite its lack of eyes, the being moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to turn toward houses as if examining them. Its movements were fluid, almost graceful despite its monstrous size. It wasn't shuffling or lumbering like creatures in horror films. It moved with deliberate precision. I remained frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I worried it might hear me. Then, as if sensing my observation, the creature turned toward my window. I quickly retreated into the shadows, pressing myself against the wall. The being approached our building. Through a tiny gap in the curtains, I watched as it stood directly outside, its featureless face seemingly focused on our apartment. It remained motionless for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. I didn't dare move a muscle. Finally, it turned and continued its journey down the street, the sound of its footsteps gradually fading into the distance. I spent the remainder of the night huddled in the corner furthest from the window, questioning my sanity and trying to rationalize what I had seen. Sleep was impossible. The following morning, exhaustion clouded my thinking. I had barely slept, and the events of the night seemed dreamlike in the harsh light of day. Had I actually seen that thing, or had my tired mind conjured it up? The logical part of me insisted it must have been a hallucination brought on by insomnia, stress, and an unfamiliar sleeping environment. I went through my day in a fog, my thoughts repeatedly drifting back to that featureless face and those 4 arms. By afternoon, I had almost convinced myself it had been a vivid nightmare, until I noticed something strange in the street. Outside our building and several houses down, there were unusual indentations in the asphalt, widely spaced, circular depressions, as if something incredibly heavy had walked precisely where I'd seen the figure. That evening, I prepared myself. I positioned my desk chair near the window, but out of direct sight from the street. On the desk, I placed my phone with the camera app open and my laptop to take notes. If the thing appeared again, I would document it. As midnight passed, the street grew quiet. One by one, lights went out in neighboring houses. By 2 a.m., the entire street was dark except for the street lamps. I fought to stay awake, pinching myself and sipping cold water. At 2:34 a.m., I heard it again, that same methodical thudding. My pulse quickened as I readied my phone. The sound grew louder, and then I saw it again, moving with the same purposeful gait down the center of the street. In the orange glow of the street lamps, the being looked even more bizarre than I remembered. Its gray skin seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, giving it a matte appearance. As it walked, its 4 arms swung slightly out of synchronization with each other, creating an unsettling rhythm. With trembling hands, I raised my phone and attempted to take a photo. The screen showed only darkness and a blur of motion. I tried again, this time with the flash on, but the results were just as useless. Streaks of light against darkness with no discernible figure. The creature suddenly stopped. Its featureless face turned toward my window, as if the flash had alerted it to my presence. I ducked down, heart hammering in my chest. When I dared to look again, it was standing directly in front of our building, its height allowing it to peer directly into my first-floor window. I watched, paralyzed, as one of its upper arms raised slowly and pressed against the glass. The window vibrated slightly under the pressure. The being's head tilted as if in curiosity, though how it could see without eyes remained a terrifying mystery. After what seemed an eternity, it withdrew its hand and continued down the street. Once it was out of sight, I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. Checking my phone, I found that none of the photos showed anything conclusive, just blurry shapes that could be dismissed as camera errors. But I knew what I had seen, and now it had noticed me. After 2 encounters, I could no longer dismiss the experience as hallucination. The next day, fatigue dragged at me, but determination pushed me forward. I needed answers, explanations, anything to make sense of what was happening. My first step was research. I spent hours online, searching for any similar sightings in Budapest or surrounding areas. I found nothing about tall gray figures, but did discover multiple forum threads discussing strange nocturnal sounds in our region, particularly in the older suburbs. Most people describe them as mechanical or industrial noises with no clear source. One post caught my attention. A woman living 3 kilometers away described waking to the sound of giant footsteps in March 2018, almost exactly a year before my experience. She had been too frightened to look outside, but mentioned that neighborhood dogs had gone berserk that night. In the afternoon, I cautiously approached my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Kovac, who had lived in the building for over 40 years. I framed my questions carefully, asking if she had ever noticed anything unusual at night, particularly strange sounds. Her reaction was unexpected. She went pale and invited me inside, checking the hallway before closing her door. In hushed tones, she told me that every few years, usually in early spring, she would hear heavy footsteps outside. Her late husband had once looked out the window and had refused to ever speak about what he saw. He would only say that some things were not meant to be witnessed. The old people in this town know to stay away from windows on certain nights, she told me. It's been happening for generations. When I pressed for details about what it was, she shook her head. Those who see it and speak of it invite attention they don't want. Be careful, young one. I left her apartment with more questions than answers, and a growing sense of dread. That evening, I visited the local library to research the town's history. The older archives revealed something interesting. Dating back to the 1800s, there were periodic reports of missing persons in the area, always in spring, always at night. The cases were never solved. More disturbing was a collection of local folklore I found in a dusty, rarely accessed section. It contained stories about the night watchman, described as a silent guardian who walked the streets after midnight, taking those who had somehow transgressed against the natural order. The descriptions were vague, but mentioned its imposing height and ability to look into second-story windows. By nightfall, I was torn between intellectually dismissing these stories as superstition and the visceral certainty that they connected to what I had seen. I returned to the apartment just as darkness fell, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them comforting. A week passed, during which I observed the figure 3 more times. Each night it appeared, it would pause longer at our building. Each morning after a sighting, I would find myself more exhausted, my nerves increasingly frayed. The lack of sleep began taking a serious toll. Dark circles formed under my eyes. My hands developed a persistent tremor. Concentrating on everyday tasks became nearly impossible. At work, colleagues commented on my appearance, asking if I was ill. I brushed off their concerns with mumbled excuses about insomnia. The workers renovating my bedroom had encountered unexpected issues with the walls, something about the structure being compromised, extending my stay in the guest room indefinitely. This news hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't face another night in that room with its window to the street, but I had nowhere else to go. I began experiencing waking nightmares and micro-sleeps, where the boundary between dreaming and reality blurred. Sometimes during the day, I would catch glimpses of gray skin and elongated limbs in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, nothing would be there. My appetite vanished. Food turned to ash in my mouth. I lost 5 kilograms in 10 days. The physical deterioration was matched by mental decline. Paranoia crept in at the edges of my consciousness. I began to suspect that neighbors were watching me, that they knew something about the creature that they weren't telling. Perhaps they were complicit somehow. I started setting up elaborate systems to monitor the street. I purchased a motion-activated camera and positioned it to record through the window. I hung bells on strings across the window frame to alert me to any movement. I created a detailed log of sightings, noting times, duration, and the entity's behavior. The camera never captured anything definitive, just shadows and distortions that could be explained away as technical glitches. Yet each night, between 2:30 and 3 a.m., the bells would chime softly as something massive passed by. During one particularly bad episode, I became convinced that the being could somehow enter the building. I barricaded my door with furniture and lined the window with salt, a protective measure I'd read about in one of the folklore books. Rationally, I knew these actions were pointless, but rationality was slipping away from me. On the 15th night in the guest bedroom, something changed. The creature appeared as usual, but instead of merely observing my window, it pressed its featureless face directly against the glass. Through the thin curtain I could see the outline of its head, smooth, ovoid, devoid of features yet somehow radiating awareness. It remained there for nearly 10 minutes, perfectly still, as if listening. Then it spoke, not aloud, but somehow directly into my mind. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It simply was. "Soon," it said, just that single word. Then it withdrew and continued its patrol. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the bathtub, as far from windows as I could get, alternating between silent tears and manic laughter. By morning, I knew I had to confront whatever this thing was or lose my mind completely. After 17 sleepless nights, I reached breaking point. I couldn't continue this way, afraid to sleep, afraid to look out the window, yet compelled to watch for the entity every night. I had two choices: flee the town entirely or confront the situation. Pride and stubborn curiosity led me to choose the latter. I spent the day preparing. First, I visited a doctor who reluctantly prescribed sleeping medication after seeing my clearly deteriorated state. Next, I purchased a high-powered flashlight, thinking that perhaps fully illuminating the creature might reveal its true nature. Finally, I bought a small digital recorder to capture any sounds it might make. That evening, I took half the prescribed sleeping pill, enough to take the edge off my anxiety, but not enough to render me unconscious. I positioned myself by the window with the curtains open, flashlight and recorder ready. If the entity appeared, I would not hide this time. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. 1 a.m., 2 a.m. My eyelids grew heavy despite my determination. By 2:30, the usual time of the creature's appearance, I had to pinch myself repeatedly to stay awake. 2:45 a.m., nothing. 3 a.m. The street remained empty. By 4 a.m., I began to wonder if my plan to confront it had somehow deterred the entity. Perhaps it only appeared to those who feared it. This thought gave me a glimmer of hope, and I eventually drifted into the first real sleep I'd had in weeks. I woke just after noon, feeling marginally refreshed. The entity's absence encouraged me. That night I repeated my vigil, again with the curtains open, making my presence obvious. Again, the creature did not appear. For 3 consecutive nights I maintained this pattern, and for 3 nights the street remained empty of unusual visitors. I began to believe that by facing my fear, I had somehow banished the entity. Sleep returned, and with it my rational mind began to reassert itself. On the 4th night, exhausted from catching up on work I'd neglected during my ordeal, I fell asleep early without my usual preparations. No medication, no flashlight ready, curtains drawn. I woke suddenly at 3:17 a.m., the room significantly colder than when I'd fallen asleep. Something had changed in the atmosphere, a heaviness, a sense of pressure, as if the air itself had thickened. And there was a sound, not the familiar thudding of footsteps, but a soft, rhythmic whisper like breathing against glass. Slowly, I turned toward the window. The curtains were now partially open, though I distinctly remembered closing them. Through the gap, I could see a portion of the street outside, illuminated by the orange glow of the street lamps. Something blocked that light, a massive silhouette pressed against the glass. It had been waiting for me to lower my guard. With trembling hands, I reached for the flashlight on my nightstand. My fingers closed around it, just as a voice echoed in my mind. "I see you." Summoning every ounce of courage, I switched on the flashlight and directed its beam at the window. The powerful light illuminated what stood outside, and the revelation stole my breath away. The window was empty. No creature, no entity. But reflected in the glass was my own face. Gaunt, pale, eyes sunken from weeks of sleep deprivation. Behind that reflection, visible in the mirror on my wardrobe door, stood the gray figure inside my room. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was empty except for me, but in the mirror, the entity remained, watching me with its featureless face. Reality fractured around me. Was I seeing something supernatural, or had my mind finally broken under the strain? The following morning found me in the psychiatric ward of Budapest Central Hospital. Apparently, neighbors had called emergency services after hearing my screams and seeing me running down the street in my nightclothes at 3:30 a.m., shouting about something following me. The doctors diagnosed me with severe parasomnia complicated by stress and sleep deprivation. They explained that prolonged insomnia can cause hallucinations indistinguishable from reality. The brain, desperate for REM sleep, begins to dream while awake, projecting nightmares onto the conscious world. My description of the entity aligned with typical hypnagogic hallucinations: exaggerated proportions, featureless faces, and a sense of malevolent presence. The footsteps I'd heard were likely my own heartbeat, amplified by anxiety and the acoustics of a quiet night. They kept me under observation for 3 days, administering medications that helped me sleep dreamlessly. As my sleep pattern normalized, my perspective cleared. The doctor's explanations made sense, far more sense than a giant four-armed entity stalking suburban Budapest. Upon my release, I returned to the apartment with newfound rationality. The renovation of my bedroom had been completed during my hospital stay, allowing me to move back into my familiar space. The guest room, with its street-facing window, was closed up. I never entered it again. Life gradually returned to normal. I maintained a strict sleep schedule and continued taking mild medication to help me rest. The nightmares receded, and with them my belief in the nocturnal visitor. 2 weeks after my hospitalization, I met Mrs. Kovacs in the hallway. She asked carefully about my health, and I explained the doctor's diagnosis, expecting her to be relieved that there was a medical explanation for my behavior. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between pity and fear. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "it's better to believe the doctors. Safer." Before I could question her meaning, she returned to her apartment, locking the door behind her. That evening, curiosity drove me to check the local news archives once more. What I found disturbed me deeply. 3 people had gone missing from nearby neighborhoods during the period of my episodes. All disappearances occurred on nights when I had seen the entity. Coincidence, I told myself. It had to be coincidence. Then I discovered something that shattered my newfound rationality. While reorganizing my belongings, I found the digital recorder I had prepared for my confrontation with the entity. I had forgotten about it entirely during my breakdown. With trembling fingers, I played back the recording. Most of it contained only the ambient sounds of night, distant traffic, the occasional dog barking, my own breathing. But at precisely 3:17 a.m., there was a voice, not mine, not in my mind, but captured clearly by the device's microphone. "I see you." That was 2 years ago. I no longer live in Budapest or anywhere near it. After hearing the recording, I packed essential belongings and left within hours, breaking my lease and abandoning most of my possessions. I relocated to a bustling downtown apartment in Vienna, deliberately choosing a place surrounded by activity and light, with no access to quiet streets. I've never again experienced the nocturnal visitations. The doctors would say this confirms their diagnosis. Changing my environment removed the stressors triggering my parasomnia. Most days, I believe them. I've rebuilt my life, found new work, and established new routines centered around healthy sleep habits. But I keep the digital recorder locked in a safe deposit box at a local bank. I haven't listened to it since that day, afraid that repeated exposure might somehow reawaken whatever connection I had established. Yet I can't bring myself to destroy it either. It remains the only tangible evidence that what I experienced might have been real. Sometimes, usually in early spring when the nights are still long, I wake suddenly around 3 a.m. with the unshakable feeling that something is watching me. On these nights, I never approach the windows. Instead, I turn on all the lights and wait for dawn. I've researched similar experiences extensively, finding scattered reports across Eastern Europe describing entities matching what I saw. Most witnesses are eventually diagnosed with mental health issues or sleep disorders. Those who resist medical intervention often disappear or suffer nervous breakdowns. Was what I saw real? Was it a manifestation of a deteriorating mind? Or is there some middle ground? Perhaps certain states of consciousness allow us to perceive things that normally exist just beyond our awareness. I don't have answers, but I've learned to live with the uncertainty. I maintain my medication regimen and see a therapist regularly. I avoid reading about unexplained disappearances. I never sleep in rooms with street-facing windows. And each year, as March approaches, I take an extended vacation somewhere far from Eastern Europe, somewhere crowded and brightly lit, where the sound of footsteps is always human and never solitary in the dead of night. Because somewhere deep inside, past all the rational explanations and medical terminology, I know what I saw. And I know it saw me too. Perhaps that's the most terrifying revelation. Not that monsters might exist, but that once they notice you, you never fully escape their attention. You just learn to live with the knowledge that somewhere, something remembers your face and knows exactly where to find you. It's simply waiting for the right moment to visit again.